Sometimes he wishes he'd never been born. If he hadn't, he wouldn't have to feel like this. Damon Grey stands in the academy hallway before the notice board, fists tight, jaw locked. At the bottom of the first-year evaluation list sits his name. Dead last. Again, he stares until the letters blur. He worked. He studied. He pushed himself until his hands shook, and it still wasn't enough. At the top, a name seems to glow. Evangeline Brightwater. First place. Light attribute. A noble. Untouchable. Voices ripple through the corridor, dragging him back. Evangeline took first again. Of course. She'll probably awaken first among the freshmen. Xander Ravencroft's third. Sylvia Moonvale's second. Same as the entrance exam. Each word sinks like a stone in Damon's chest. Dropping out isn't an option. Luna's medicine depends on the scholarship. Lose the rank. Lose the million zenny. Lose her. He swallows hard and turns away, thoughts racing to his sister. They only have each other. If I stop here, she dies. Head down, he bumps someone. Sorry. A hand jerks him backward and shoves him to the floor. You low life, a voice snaps. You hit Xander and think sorry covers it. Marcus Fayjoy. Blue hair, sharp tongue. Xander's shadow. Deaf, Gray. Need a lesson. Marcus sneers. Damon says nothing. This isn't new. Marcus hits. Xander watches. Damon endures. I'm sorry, Damon mutters, forcing the words out. He stands to leave. Gray. Marcus grabs his shoulder. You don't walk away unless I say so. Damon knocks the hand aside. Not today. Move. Rage twists Marcus's face. You never learn, do you? Hope the healer's free. Damon lifts his guard. Same script, different day. Marcus lives to crush the weak, and no one is weaker than Damon. Yet something in him never bends, and that's what Marcus hates most. Marcus draws back. That's enough, Xander says, voice flat. I'm here to check my score, not watch you squash an insect. Insect. The word burns. Damon bites down on the taste of it. I want to be stronger. Marcus steps back at once. Damon turns away, hands clenched. He hates them, but he hates his own weakness more. So he won't bow. Not to them. Not ever. I am not an insect. Xander Ravencroft. I'll make you regret looking down on me. The vow feels small against the truth. An ant doesn't topple a giant. Not while the gap remains. Knowing that doesn't stop the words from shaking through him. He leaves the building, anger and shame coiling tight in his chest. The chatter fades behind him as he cuts away from the crowds and heads toward the forest beyond the academy grounds. His pace quickens. He keeps his gaze on the path, so no one sees the tears gathering. Frustration, helplessness, fury, and the stubborn refusal to break. We aren't asked to be born. We're forced to exist. Today was horrible. Tomorrow will be worse. In the end, it all passes. All things fade. Damon Grey found those words years ago, carved into a broken stone beneath the roots of an ancient tree. He discovered them at his lowest point and kept them like a charm against surrender. The slab was shattered, the message incomplete, but the pieces he could read stuck fast. The first line hit like a verdict. No one chooses their birth. Noble or commoner, blessed or cursed. You start where someone else puts you. Damon's place was hardship. The second matched his days, one bad day after another, each a little heavier than the last. The final line offered the smallest mercy. Everything ends, even pain. If suffering fades, then he could keep moving. He had to, but the academy only sharpened the edges. Surrounded by people who looked down on him, hope frayed thin. He slipped into the forest, tears hot on his cheeks, biting his lip until he tasted blood. He clung to the grim mantra, like a prayer to any god that might listen. I'm not an insect, he whispered, step after step. In a small clearing, his makeshift training ground, stood a dummy and a rack of battered practice weapons. He took up a wooden sword, blurred vision, tight throat. He swung. Again. Harder. He hit until his palms split, until sweat ran with blood, until his arms shook and the sun slid low and the sword felt like iron. Footsteps crunched behind him. Shadows dropped across the ground. Before he could turn, a boot slammed into his gut and knocked the breath from him. Marcus Fayjoy stood there with his usual pack. Lark Bonaire, Isaac Rigardi, and a few others, Xander Ravencroft's hangers-on, with Marcus eager to lead. I hate nobles, Damon thought, pushing to his feet. Well, Marcus drawled. The Academy's black sheep. You think bumping into Xander passes with a sorry? He added. They wanted any excuse. Damon knew it. He stood his ground anyway. I already apologized. What else do you want? Lark stepped in, smirking. Listen to him talk back. The Academy's shame thinks he can look down on his betters. The circle tightened. No exit. Lark struck first, his fist cracking against Damon's temple and sending him reeling into Marcus, who raised a palm and blasted him with ice. Damon staggered, numb, straight into Isaac's waiting punch. Earth-coated knuckles crashed into his chest. He hit the dirt. He rolled on instinct as another shard of frost hissed past. Lark's boot found his ribs. Laughter rose around him. Hands pinned his arms. Lark crouched and drove a fist into Damon's face. Blood spilled hot over his lip. Come on, Grey, Marcus said behind him, amused. Show us that shadow magic. Let's see if it's worth anything. Another punch. Stars. The grip on his arms loosened. Lark drew back to kick his head. Damon moved first. He ducked and drove his fist straight into Lark's crotch. Lark folded with a strangled gasp, dropping to his knees. Damon staggered up, breathing ragged, and ran, into trees, into dusk, into long, tangled shadows. For a heartbeat, Marcus stared. Then fury snapped his shock in two. Get up, he barked. After him. Don't let him get away. They crashed into the forest after him, their shouts chasing him through the falling dark.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
The forest grew darker as the last rays of sunlight faded, but Damon kept running, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he scanned the shadows for somewhere to hide. Behind him, angry voices echoed through the trees, each shout tinged with malice. He could hear Marcus, urging the others on with vicious excitement. And worst of all, Lark's enraged voice, still raw from the blow Damon had delivered to his crotch. If they catch me, I'm dead. Damon pushed himself further into the dense woods, stumbling over a protruding root and crashing face first into the dirt. His bones ached, his eyes still stinging from earlier tears, and his palms, raw from the relentless training, burned as he struggled back to his feet. His entire body was battered and bruised, a reminder of the beating he had already taken, but he knew stopping was not an option. If he had one talent, it was running away, and if that was all he had, then he was going to give it everything he had left. With a deep, shaky breath, he ducked low under the branches and kept running, his vision blurred as exhaustion set in. He paused briefly, leaning against a tree to catch his breath. I lost them, few. He let out a relieved sigh, but as the adrenaline faded, the pain surged back, making him wince. He straightened, ready to sneak his way back and maybe find a healer. But just then, an icicle whizzed past his face, grazing his cheek. Startled, he looked up to see Marcus and the others closing in. Found him. Quick, after him. Marcus's voice cut through the forest, and Damon didn't bother looking back. He bolted deeper into the shadows. Don't lose sight of him. He's good at hiding, one of them shouted. Grey, stop running, or you'll only make this worse for yourself. Damon's mind buzzed with fear, but he knew there was no turning back. If they were going to catch him, he'd make them work for it. He tore through the trees, every step bringing him closer to the ominous boundary that marked the edge of the Academy's protection. One of the boys hesitated, eyeing the edge of the forest. He's running towards the barrier. Marcus's face twisted in frustration. Grey, stop now, and I won't kill you. But if you run outside the barrier, the first monster you meet will. Damon's heart pounded even harder, knowing the danger of crossing that line. The barrier kept countless deadly creatures at bay, monsters that the Academy's students only faced under close supervision. And yet, He'd rather take his chances with the unknown than face whatever fate Marcus and his gang had in store. Ducking under a branch, he sprinted forward, unaware of just how close he was to the barrier until he saw the faint distortion in the air. For a split second, he slowed down, but Lark's furious voice echoed from behind, reminding him of the beating that awaited him if he stopped. Without a second thought, Damon plunged through the barrier. He stumbled, feeling as if he'd passed through a wall of icy water, but quickly regained his footing and ran. Behind him, the boys skidded to a halt at the barrier, hesitating, until Lark, filled with unrestrained rage, charged through with a roar. "Damon, you're dead. Idiot!" Marcus cursed, but his pride refused to let Damon escape. With a growl, he followed, prompting the others to fall in line. Damon's pulse raced as he heard them still pursuing him, his lungs burning as he struggled to keep going. He could only vaguely recall stories about this part of the forest, where only the professors dared tread, but fear pushed him forward, his legs moving out of sheer instinct. But his strength was fading, and soon he stumbled to a halt, barely avoiding a steep drop. Before him was a deep ravine, about 14 meters down, a river churning in the darkness below. He turned, desperate, but his pursuers were already upon him. "Bastard, I'm going to kill you." Lark's voice rang out before his fist slammed into Damon's face, knocking him to the ground and dangerously close to the edge of the ditch. Damon barely had time to brace as Lark followed with a series of kicks, each one brutal and unrestrained. A blast of wind magic cut through the air, sending sharp pain through his skin as he felt blood trickle down his face. He coughed, tasting blood, his head spinning as Lark's relentless assault left him breathless. "That's enough, Lark." Marcus finally called out, his voice cold and impatient. Lark, panting with fury, stepped back. Marcus approached Damon, who was lying on the ground, barely conscious, his vision swimming. Marcus grabbed a fistful of Damon's hair, lifting his head just enough to meet his gaze. "Beg, Grey." Marcus sneered, his lips twisting into a cruel smile. "Beg, and it will all be over." Damon's vision was blurred with blood, but he managed a defiant smile, blood staining his teeth. "Go fuck yourself." Marcus's face darkened with rage. "Beat him until he begs," he snarled. And so, they closed in again, fists ready. The other boys joined in, laughing cruelly as they tossed Damon around like a rag doll, ignoring his pain groans. Lark, the worst of them all, stomped hard on Damon's leg, and a sickening crunch echoed through the night as the bone broke. Damon screamed, his voice lost under their mocking laughter. After a few more minutes of brutal kicks and punches, Marcus finally raised a hand to call them off. But Lark didn't stop, his eyes blazing with fury as he pressed his foot down harder. Marcus stepped between them, shoving Lark back. "Enough, Lark," he snapped. Marcus crouched down, gripping Damon by the hair and forcing his bloodied face up to look at him. "You know, Grey, I really don't like you." Marcus sneered, his voice low. "But what I hate most is your attitude. Someone as weak as you should know to bow their head. But not you. You walk through the halls like you own the place. You talk to your betters and look them right in the eye. No respect at all." With a sudden, violent motion, Marcus slammed Damon's head into the ground. Damon groaned in agony, blood streaking down his face as Marcus stood and looked him over, his mouth twisting in disgust. Damon struggled to sit up, swaying as he looked around at Marcus, Lark, Isaac, and the others, his vision blurring from the pain. With a defiant glare, he spat out a bloody tooth and rasped, "You bastards go to hell." Marcus's expression darkened, ready to strike again, but Lark beat him to it. With a flick of his hand, he blasted Damon with a gust of wind magic, sending him hurtling backward into a dark, shadowed ravine below. Marcus's eyes widened in horror. What have you done? You just killed him." He rushed to the edge, peering down into the darkness for any sign of Damon, but the ditch was too deep, the shadows swallowing everything. Panic set in as he clenched his jaw, gripping his head. "Damn it, we need to leave now. If anyone asks, we were never here." Lark was still trembling with rage, but the other boys scrambled back, fear gripping them. Marcus glanced over his shoulder, his voice urgent. "Let's go. Now." Leaving Damon to his fate, they disappeared into the night. The ditch wasn't that deep, but Damon's body rolled painfully down a rocky slope. He hit the bottom with a sickening splat and a series of painful crunches as his ribs bore the impact. He groaned, his vision spinning as he struggled to stay conscious. Looking up, he could barely make out the moon through the branches above, casting a dim, haunting glow. He could hear their voices fading as the other boys fled, abandoning him. "Wait, no, don't leave me here. Wait, stop," he thought desperately, but he couldn't even choke out the words, his throat filled with blood, his voice too weak to scream. As silence settled over the ditch, an eerie sound stirred the air, something shifting in the darkness nearby. Damon's heart pounded faster, fear slicing through the fog of his pain. He was outside the barrier. Monsters sometimes lurked here. Though he hadn't gone far, he knew he was vulnerable. His eyes widened in terror as he strained to see, the moonlight barely illuminating the pit. In the shadows, something moved, a viscous, inky blackness shifting slowly toward him, almost blending with the darkness around it. The creature was formless, a mass like black slime that crept closer with a horrifying, unnatural grace. Damon trembled, a primal fear overtaking him as the formless being slithered closer. He tried to scream, tried to call for help, but only a faint, choked sound escaped his lips. "No, please, no, someone, please." The creature loomed over him, silent and menacing. His thoughts screamed for mercy, yet no sound escaped as it inched closer, his entire body locked in terror. The moon cast a ghostly light, and his heart thundered as the creature halted directly above him. Without warning, it sank down into his shadow, merging with the darkness beneath him. A surge of agony tore through his body as the entity seeped deeper into his form, but he was too weak to cry out. He could feel it burrowing into his very essence, a writhing blackness settling into his soul. Tears spilled from his eyes as he lay helpless. Is this really how I'm going to die, in a ditch? The pain was overwhelming, his mind fading as he clung to his last thoughts. "I'm sorry, Luna." He finally managed a faint, pain-laced whisper. The creature seeped deeper, its presence merging with his own until his consciousness began to blur, sinking into darkness. As the last trace of the creature entered his shadow, an overwhelming exhaustion overtook him. Yet, in that final moment, an oath sparked to life in his mind, fueled by a burning hatred and resentment. "If I had a second chance, I swear, I'll make them pay." As his last spark of awareness flickered out, he heard a strange metallic chime. Ding! System initialization has begun. The morning sun pierced through Damon's barely open eyes, casting harsh rays that made him squint. For a moment, he lay there in a daze, touching his face in disbelief. I'm alive. I didn't die," he whispered, his voice thick with astonishment, his words almost breaking as if they would release the tears he held back. He scanned the area. The strange, dark, viscous creature that had attacked him in the ditch the night before was nowhere to be seen. He could scarcely comprehend what had happened, but before he could gather his thoughts, something floated before him, a black panel with white text. It read, "System initialization complete. Do you wish to proceed? Y/N." Damon's brows knit together in confusion as he muttered, "Proceed." As soon as he spoke, the words flickered and a voice echoed in his mind. "Welcome to the living shadow system, individual Damon Grey. Your shadow is alive. Feed your shadow, devour souls, level up, gain skills, complete quests, and grow stronger. Do you wish to view your current stats? Y/N." The voice rattled on, as if it expected him to be familiar with these terms. Hesitantly, Damon whispered, Yes." The screen shifted, revealing his stats in intricate detail. HP 50/50, Mana 30/30, Strength 9, Agility 12, Speed 25, Endurance 10, Class Shadow 100, Shadow hunger levels, 0%. Shadow level, 1. Condition, shadow is full. Attributes, Umbra. Skills, no skills acquired. Locked. Damon stared at the screen, bewildered, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of it all. The voice had said his shadow was alive. Could that possibly be true? He quickly looked down, and there, cast upon the ground, was his shadow. A sigh of relief escaped him. Phew, thank the goddess. I thought my shadow was stolen. In this world, certain monsters had the power to rob people of their shadows or even kill by striking through them. He'd heard tales of such horrors lurking on the demon continent, Centros, though rare in Solthean, where he lived. But as he let his gaze linger, his shadow moved. Not him, just the shadow. Damon felt a jolt of terror as he stumbled backward. His shadow merely stayed in place, a slight shift in its posture as if it were rolling its eyes at him. What is happening, my shadow? His mouth went dry as he whispered in shock. He remained cautious, never taking his eyes off it. Then, swallowing hard, he slowly approached. But the shadow, as if annoyed, rushed back and attached itself to him like any ordinary shadow. Damon flinched, but his shadow acted normally, mirroring his every movement. Breathing hard, he forced himself to calm down. With a wary glance around, he picked up a stick, prodding at the shadow. It was nothing more than his own shape on the ground. A sudden realization dawned. His shadow was gesturing as if pointing to something. Damon looked in the direction it pointed and noticed the stats panel hovering before him. "You want me to look at this?" he murmured. The shadow nodded in affirmation. Damon's nerves calmed, just slightly, but he kept his guard up. Glancing at the panel, his eyes locked on the HP 50-50 section. At his confusion, the panel expanded. HP 50-50 health points. Your total health points, HP, represent your physical vitality. When HP drops to 0, you will perish. Physical injuries, magical attacks, or overuse of certain shadow abilities and skills can deplete your HP. Use healing items or abilities to restore HP when it falls below safe levels. Current status. Your HP is at its maximum, indicating you are in good physical health. The explanation jolted Damon, as he suddenly realized something obvious, something he should have noticed the moment he woke up. My injuries, they're gone. He patted himself down, shrugging off his academy jacket, his hands tracing over his body in search of any wounds. He probed his mouth with his fingers, checking for the tooth he'd lost in the fight. It was there. In disbelief, he lifted his shirt, scanning his torso, but there wasn't a single scar, not even a mark from his past fights. I don't have a single injury. Damon lifted his white shirt again, glancing down and inspecting his body. Not a single scar remained from the past, a fact that unsettled him. His fingers trailed along his skin, feeling smoothness where there once were wounds and reminders of hardship. Today felt strange, though he couldn't quite tell if it was for better or worse. Shaking his head, Damon tried to shrug off the thought. Focus. There were more important things to examine. Mana. 30-30. Magical energy. Mana is your energy pool, used to cast magical abilities, including those drawn from the system. Shadow-related abilities and some skills will deplete this pool. Keep a close eye on it during battle, as running out of mana may leave you vulnerable. Current status. Full mana allows for optimal casting of abilities. Spend wisely. Note, you have an unusually low mana pool. Leveling up is highly recommended. Damon felt a stab of bitterness. He'd always known his mana level was abysmal. The Academy's tests had confirmed that. A pitiful 30, the lowest in the Academy's history, which had made him an easy target for bullying. The next lowest mana pool was 656. Between him and that student lay an insurmountable gap. But the voice said I could level up. No, it called itself the system. He paused, a hint of hope stirring. But how do I level up? The system didn't respond this time. With a sigh, he moved to check his other stats. Strength, physical power. Predictably, his strength was rated low. Agility, a mix of dexterity and reflexes. The system rated him as average here, though it didn't sound nearly as dismal as his mana. Speed, his movement speed, slightly above average, but nothing remarkable. Endurance, a measure of stamina and durability. Damon knew he could take a beating after everything he'd endured. Still, the system classified him as below average. Finally, he reached the section on class. Class, no class assigned. At present, you have no formal class assigned. Once you unlock a specialized combat or magic class, you will gain access to class-specific skills and perks. The system may allow for an unconventional class in the future. Current status, undefined. As you explore the depths of your shadow abilities and level up, a class may be discovered or created. Damon's breath hitched. I can gain a class. The words gave him a glimmer of hope. People in this world could awaken up to 7 classes over their lifetime, but he'd never thought he'd awaken even one. Shadow, 100 Shadow Energy. Shadow Energy is the primary resource for utilizing the abilities of the living shadow. It regenerates through certain actions such as consuming life force and souls. Shadow energy is spent when manipulating shadows or using certain skills, and it's critical to maintain this resource or risk weakening your shadow and death. Current status: your shadow energy is full. This is ideal for activating and sustaining shadow abilities during combat or exploration. Warning: shadow energy must be kept at a stable level. Damon read over the description, not fully grasping it. Still, the idea of wielding shadow abilities intrigued him. He pushed on, reaching the next, most unsettling stat. Shadow, hunger level, 0%, shadow's appetite. The hunger level represents the shadow's need to consume flesh and souls. As you use your abilities, the shadow's hunger will increase, urging you to feed it. Neglecting this hunger can lead to dangerous consequences, such as losing control over your actions or the shadow taking over. Be mindful not to let the hunger grow too high. Note: when shadow hunger reaches 100%, HP will begin to decline until individual perishes. 0% to 20% hunger, safe range. The shadow is under control. 20% to 50% hunger, increased temptation to feed. Minor stat boosts: 50% to 80% hunger, loss of partial control. Significant power boosts: 90% to 100% hunger, shadow becomes ravenous, fully takes control. Immediate risk of losing your humanity. Current status: the shadow is currently sated, leaving you in full control. Damon's face drained of color as he read the words. Feed my shadow, but with what flesh? What type? The system remained silent, offering no answer to his questions. Damon glanced down at his shadow, frustration edging his voice. How do I even go about feeding a shadow? His shadow responded by mimicking a thoughtful gesture, placing a hand under an imagined chin, as if it were pondering the question itself. Damon sighed, giving his cheeks a quick slap to regain focus and composure. He moved his gaze to the next stat. Shadow level 1. Your shadow level reflects your control and power over your shadow. You can level up by feeding it and completing specific challenges or quests, which will grant you stat points to enhance HP, mana, and other attributes. Level up requirements. Souls consumed, 0/3. Damon's eyes widened. Souls. He had to devour souls, but he still didn't know how. Sitting on the ground, he spent a few minutes piecing together what he could. So, souls were necessary to level up, and maybe the flesh was just fuel for the shadow itself. He cast another glance at his shadow, noticing that it now looked at him with an expression that could only be described as annoyed, as if he were a clueless novice fumbling with a brand new system. Am I right about that? He asked, half joking. The shadow shrugged, appearing thoroughly unimpressed. Damon scowled, deciding to stay silent. He turned his attention back to the system panel. Condition: shadow is full. Current state: this condition means that the shadow has recently been fed and its hunger is sated. You retain full control over the entity, and no urgent feeding is necessary. However, as you engage in battles and use shadow abilities, This condition will shift based on the hunger level. Current status: safe. No need for immediate consumption. Damon exhaled a sigh of relief, feeling as if he'd been on a roller coaster since morning. If it's full, then I don't have to worry about it for now. Taking a deep breath, he tried to steady his mind. There was a lot to absorb, and something about this system felt unsettling, perhaps even sinister. After all, he couldn't shake the memory of the strange monster that had attacked and fused into his shadow. Attributes: Umbra Shadow Essence. The Umbra attribute represents your magical affinity and connection to the shadow entity. It governs how you interact with your powers and affects overall stats when using shadow-based abilities. As your shadow level increases, this attribute will evolve, unlocking new abilities and stat boosts based on the shadow's needs and your mastery over it. Current status: the Umbra attribute is in its initial stage, but it will grow with you. Further details will unlock as you progress. I guess this is my magic attribute, Damon muttered, rolling his eyes. Not exactly a shocker, but a shadow attribute? It's not really the most powerful thing. Can't help but wish I was born with something a little more normal and, a decent amount of mana. No matter how much he learned, that weak mana pool weighed on him. His eyes drifted to the skills tab, which currently showed none available, but his curiosity kept him exploring. Skills: acquirable abilities. Skills represent both active and passive abilities you can acquire as you grow stronger. At this time, no skills have been unlocked. Your first few skills will likely involve basic active and passive abilities, with more advanced skills revealed as your shadow level increases. Skills offer combat advantages, mobility enhancements, or other utilities in battle and exploration. Current status: no skills acquired. Feed your shadow or level up to gain new skills. Damon's eyes narrowed. Skills: I can gain skills by leveling up and feeding my shadow. Everything always comes back to feeding this thing. Can I even still call him my shadow anymore? At the bottom of the interface, a new prompt caught his eye. Locked. Level up to unlock new system mechanics. New system mechanics? Does that mean the system hasn't shown me everything yet? Damon muttered, rubbing his chin. It's already healed me and let my shadow break free from its endless mimicry. What else can it do? He felt a pang of uncertainty. He needed to return to the academy. Getting expelled wasn't an option, and there was Marcus and his group to think about. More importantly, he couldn't just stroll back with a shadow that had a mind of its own. What if the Temple's Inquisition gets word of this? He shivered. They might torture me for heresy. Suspect I made a pact with a demon. The risk was low, but it wasn't non-existent. He had to find a way to make his shadow act normal. The system said I can control it if I have enough shadow energy, right? Testing that, he raised his hand toward his shadow. It lingered nearby, waving back at him. Damon gave a firm command. Stop. The shadow froze. He grinned, only to frown as it remained still, ignoring his movements. He bit his lip. Follow me. Copy my movements. His shadow gave him a thumbs up and obediently began to mimic him. Damon moved around, jumped, and ran back and forth. To his relief, his shadow mirrored him like normal. He let out a deep breath, praised the goddess. Satisfied, he pointed at a rock in the distance. Go over there. The shadow zipped across to the rock, leaving Damon without a shadow as he stood in the sunlight. I see. I should keep this secret for now. If anyone finds out, maybe I can pass it off as first-class magic. Or just say I awakened a new spell. Better to keep things under wraps until he learned more about the system and his shadow. Damon called it back, and to his relief, it returned quickly. He still needed to test his abilities, but for now he had more pressing matters, like washing the grime from his face. Noticing his torn academy uniform, he was surprised to see the fabric mending itself. That's material from the magic continent for you, he thought. The academy's uniform, made in Arona, possessed unique properties like self-repair, quick cleaning, and drying. Damon had never been to Arona, the famed continent of magic and technology. He'd live his entire life on the war continent, Solthean, and likely wouldn't leave it. He walked to the nearby river. Cautious now that he was beyond the Academy's protective barrier, he stopped at the water's edge, peering into the blue depths. Seeing nothing unusual, he scooped up some water and splashed it over his face. He glanced at his reflection and froze. Am I my eyes? Damon just stared into the water, his expression blank as he processed what he saw. The reflection staring back was that of a gloomy young man, his face contorted in shock and confusion. His mouth quivered. He widened his eyes, leaning closer to the water to make sure he wasn't imagining things. But there was no mistake. Something was very wrong with his eyes. He gasped, his breath quickening. What happened to my eyes? His irises had turned pitch black, so dark that he couldn't tell where the irises ended and the pupils began. It was as if they'd merged into one void, swallowing the once blue color entirely. He pressed his hands against his eyes, prying them open wider, hoping he was just seeing things. But no matter how hard he stared, the blackness remained. What do I do? What if someone notices? He stopped himself, forcing a wry smile. Who's even going to notice? Nobody cares about me. I don't even have friends. Saying it out loud felt hollow, a sad truth for a boy his age. Ever since it had been revealed that he possessed a pitiful mana pool of only 30, he was seen as too insignificant to be worth anyone's attention. Add to that his tendency to butt heads with the nobles, and even the commoners who managed to pass the harsh entrance exams avoided him. And then there was his own personality, a bit gloomy, naturally introverted. He sighed at his reflection, but then shook his head to brush off the pang of loneliness. He hadn't come to the Academy to make friends, anyway. Right, I'm here for the 1,000,000 zenny. He reminded himself. It was all for the money that could keep his sister alive. Standing up, he grabbed his Academy jacket from the ground, dusted it off, and pulled it on before scanning the ravine for a way out. But something unusual caught his attention. The system screen was following him. He blinked in surprise. How do I make this disappear? Am I going to have this following me around? What if everyone sees it? Before he even finished speaking, the system panel blinked out of existence. It disappeared. His shadow, watching the whole thing, slapped its own head in exasperation. Damon's mouth twitched as he saw even his shadow looking disappointed in him. You wouldn't happen to know how to make it reappear, right? The shadow seemed to give him a look of disgust. Though it had no face, its posture was enough to convey disappointment. TCH, can't rely on you, can I, unless... Damon felt himself relax a little, no longer as wary of his own shadow, though he still kept his guard up. He decided to try something. System, open. The panel flickered into existence again, though his shadow seemed annoyed by the exact phrasing he used. Ignoring it, Damon whispered, disappear. The screen vanished, and he tried again. System. It opened. Close. It closed. For the next few minutes, he tried different words to open and close the system panel, finally realizing it wasn't the words that triggered it, but his thoughts. He didn't need to say anything. He just had to think about wanting it open or closed. Satisfied, he exhaled. At least one thing's in my control. With that done, he glanced at his shadow, which looked so bored and annoyed it could die from sheer impatience. Damon smirked, feeling a smug sense of triumph. All right, let's head back to the Academy and act normal around other people. In response, the shadow snapped to attention, giving him a sharp salute. Damon didn't recognize the gesture. After all, the military salute in his world was different, but he could tell it was a sign of acknowledgement. That was good enough. Damon took in his surroundings, scanning the forest. After some walking, he found where the ravine ended and climbed up a hill, stopping at the top to gaze out at the dense forest stretching far ahead. This was outside the Academy's protective barrier. The further one ventured, the more dangerous it became. Goblins, kobolds, trolls, ogres, and all manner of terrifying creatures lurked out there. He knew this was no place for someone like him. Turning back, he walked toward the Academy's barrier. It didn't take long to cross into familiar grounds, where he spotted tracks left by Marcus and his group. Those idiots left me for dead and didn't even bother hiding their tracks. He muttered, amused by their carelessness. If I were in their shoes, I'd have covered my tracks and left a few hollow clues to mislead any investigations. He shook his head. He wouldn't be in their shoes, but he'd make sure they regretted what they did. After all, the goddess of doom was also the goddess of judgment, and by her hand, he would see them punished. Resolute, he continued out of the forest, eventually reaching the academy grounds. Passing by his secret training spot, he saw faint bloodstains still marking the ground from when he'd been beaten up. Ignoring them, he made his way to his dorm. Surprisingly, despite his status as the weakest and a commoner, his dorm was in the academy's finest building. Passing by other students heading to class, no one paid him any mind. The dorm building he lived in was known as the Halls of War, or simply the War Halls. Named after the war continent Solthean, it was a tribute to the goddess of doom and war. The building resembled a grand castle. Damon had never known such luxury until he moved in here. Not surprisingly, he was the only commoner in the dorm, a fact owed to his unique scholarship, a golden ticket recommendation that allowed him to bypass the entrance exams, gain a place in the best dorm, and receive $1 million Zenny scholarship fund. Entering the lavish hall designed for the wealthiest noble lineages, he took the side stairs up to his floor. Reaching his dorm, he stepped inside. The spacious room was more like a suite. After a quick bath to wash off the grime, he changed into a fresh uniform. A flicker of anxiety washed over him. What if someone noticed something strange about him? What if they saw his eyes? But no one did, and his shadow stayed obedient, avoiding any unwanted attention. He walked into the main building, hoping to make it to class on time. But as he hurried down the hall, a voice called out to him. "Damon Grey, see me in my office at once." Damon froze at the sound of that voice, cold, strict, and unmistakably imperious. His legs felt a little weak as he turned to face the source. "Ark, seems my luck runs out here." He slowly turned around, meeting the gaze of a man in his 30s. The man had long dark hair and a stern, no-nonsense expression, his pale gray eyes carrying an air of unyielding authority. Dressed in black, he looked every bit as dark and foreboding as his reputation. This was Professor Cale Blackthorne, the strictest professor in the academy. Damon had a gnawing feeling the man held a particular dislike for him. Professor Blackthorne specialized in dark magic, which, theoretically, should have made him a good mentor for Damon, whose shadow attribute aligned with it. But the moment Cale learned Damon's mana pool barely reached a paltry 30, he dismissed him entirely. Cale's cold gray eyes narrowed, piercing Damon like a dagger. This can't be good. An ominous feeling settled in Damon's gut, as if whatever awaited him in Blackthorne's office was bound to be unpleasant. "Follow me, Damon Grey," Professor Cale said, already turning to lead the way. Damon frowned, trying to find an escape route. "I have a class right now. Maybe I can come later," he ventured. Cale didn't even pause. "I've already spoken to your professor for elemental manipulation. You've been excused." Biting his lip, Damon knew he was out of excuses. Whatever fate awaited him, he had no choice but to follow. "Ah, goddess be with me," he muttered under his breath, reluctantly trailing behind. As they walked, Damon's eyes flitted across the halls. Students greeted Professor Cale with respect, and those who knew his reputation glanced at Damon with pity. Others, recognizing Damon as the academy's outcast, shot him disdainful looks, some even smirking, as if reveling in his misfortune. He ignored them, knowing they'd never amount to more than spectators in his life. If mocking him gave them a sense of purpose, he thought, then so be it. This was the nature of most mortals, he mused. They needed to see someone worse off to feel better about their own lives. And for now, he was their favorite target. They soon arrived at Professor Cale's office, a grand space lined with shelves packed with books, rare ingredients, and the parts of exotic monsters, likely collected for research. The furniture was elegant and tasteful, befitting a noble of the Blackthorne family. Damon didn't have time to appreciate the view. His heart was pounding so hard it might leap out of his chest. He kept his expression calm, though his mind raced, considering every possible excuse and defense he might need. If it came to it, he was even willing to beg. "Take a seat," Cale commanded, gesturing to a chair in front of the desk as he settled into his own. Damon nodded and sat down, forcing himself to stay alert despite the comfortable chair. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not here. The moment he was seated, Professor Kale tossed a stack of papers onto the desk. The sheets scattered across the table in front of him, each one stamped with his name. Kale leaned back, his cold eyes fixed on Damon. "Do you see this, Damon Grey? This is your score, your cumulative scores since you enrolled in the academy." Damon bit his lip. He didn't need to look. He already knew the scores were abysmal. Kale continued, voice dripping with disdain. "Since you enrolled, you've shown no improvement whatsoever. Every test proves your incompetence." Picking up one of the papers, Kale read from it. Mana assessment. Student Damon Grey possesses a mana pool of 30. Not just low, record-breaking. You've set a new low in the Academy's history. And that's not all. Your physical assessment scores were equally dismal. Kale clenched his jaw, barely concealing his irritation. Let's set aside physical capability for a moment. Not everyone has the strength to contribute to the goddess races through martial might or powerful magic. But let's review your theoretical scores. He picked up another paper and scanned it, his expression darkening further. You don't even know the basic terms. You're nothing but an ignorant commoner without a shred of foundational knowledge. Kale's face reddened slightly as a vein pulsed at his temple. Taking a slow breath, he went on, "Someone like you should never have been allowed to cross the gates of our glorious Aether Academy. Yet here you are." Kale shook his head, disgust evident in his tone. "The only reason you're here is because of a golden ticket, one you're entirely undeserving of." Damon kept his head lowered, silent as Kale tore into him. He didn't argue. Every word stung with truth. When you showed up with a golden ticket, the Academy had its doubts. We wonder how someone so lowly could come by such a thing. After investigating, we discovered the source, and it was surprising, to say the least. At this, Damon looked up, his curiosity piqued. He'd always wondered about the ticket himself. All he knew was that it had somehow come into his family's possession and was included in the inheritance left for him and his younger sister, Luna. A golden ticket was as prestigious as it sounded. A literal golden ticket granting the holder admission to Aether Academy, the world's most esteemed institution. Along with it came a scholarship fund of 1 million zeni each semester. The ticket, issued only once a year to the best graduating student, served as a recommendation of sorts. If the recipient chose to pass it on, the beneficiary would inherit its privileges, gaining automatic entrance to the academy without any examination. He raised his head, feeling a flicker of hope. Who would bestow such an invaluable gift on him? What connection could they possibly have with his family? Kale continued to glare at him. It's mind-boggling that someone of such standing would waste the golden ticket on you. Someone like you will never amount to anything. Damon's fists clenched, his shadow beneath him flickering erratically in response to his rising frustration. But he kept silent, swallowing down his anger. You've shown no improvement, failed every evaluation, every test. Your performance in this first quarter is rock bottom. Kale spat, his voice laced with scorn. By the glory of the goddess, I can't fathom why someone as exalted as Sarah's Blade would give you her golden ticket, only for you to come here and disgrace her name. At the mention of that name, Damon's breath caught in his throat. His anger evaporated, replaced by a wave of shock that settled heavily in his chest. His eyes widened, filled with disbelief. Sarah's Blade, he whispered, stunned. Across the 9 continents of Aetherus, from the central continent ruled by demons to the other 8 governed by the goddess races, there was hardly a soul unfamiliar with the name Sarah's Blade. For demons, she was a feared adversary. For the goddess races, she was a revered hero. Sarah's Blade was a prodigy from the war continent of Solthean, born into a mid-level noble household. By age 3, she could wield a sword. By age 5, she had defeated someone who had awakened their first class. At 6, she awakened her own class, a unique one not shared by the masses. That was merely the beginning. By 10, she had reached her second class advancement. At 11, she'd already slain numerous monsters and was hailed as a prodigy. By 14, she entered the academy quickly becoming its top student, her talent dazzling the entire world. She achieved her fourth-class advancement at 15, and by graduation, she was stronger than most of the professors. They said she was blessed by the goddess of doom, a warrior of unparalleled power. But her legend didn't stop there. After her record-breaking graduation, she joined the war against the demon continent of Centros. At the time, the demons were steadily advancing in a war that had raged for centuries. The goddess races were losing ground until Ceres arrived. Her feats on the battlefield became legendary, and over the years, she reached the fifth-class advancement. With her power, she was instrumental in forcing the demon continent into a truce. Even Damon, who'd grown up far from glory, knew the name Ceres Blade. She was a myth, a legend, and somehow his golden ticket had come from her. "My goddess, Ceres Blade," Damon whispered, his frustration momentarily forgotten as he stared, wide-eyed. Kale's expression barely softened. "Correct. The Ceres Blade was the original owner of your golden ticket. As for how it came to be in your hands, that's beyond me." Kale sighed, glancing at Damon with barely contained disdain. "It seems she gave it to a young couple named Grey." He sneered. "And somehow, that couple birthed a failure like you. It pains me to think that the eminent name of Ceres Blade is associated with someone of your caliber. Your very existence tarnishes her legacy." Damon lowered his head, his hands visibly trembling. He felt the weight of Kale's scorn pressing down on him, filling him with a suffocating shame. Kale reached into his pocket, retrieving a brooch with the Academy's crest. Made of silver, it bore a rune for probation, inscribed in stark lettering. Kale pushed a sheet of paper toward Damon, his gaze laced with contempt. "I'm giving you a chance," he said. "Fill this out, and drop out of the Academy voluntarily." The paper slid toward Damon, and his heart sank, his face turning pale. He bit his lip until he tasted blood. Kale watched him, unfazed by his distress. "Sign it and leave on your own accord. That's better than being expelled and thrown out without any dignity. If you have even a scrap of respect for Ceres Blade, you'll do this much for her legacy. Your failure reflects on her name as well." Damon held the paper, fingers brushing against the pen on the table. But he hesitated, a memory flashing in his mind. His sister, Luna, her pale hair splayed around her as she lay in bed, struggling to live as pain racked her body. "Luna," he whispered, his emotions swirling into a storm of rage and frustration. How could he even consider giving up? He hadn't come to the Academy for fame or honor. He was here to earn enough to save his sister. If Kale Blackthorn wanted him gone, he'd comply, if Kale was willing to pay his sister's medical expenses in return. But since that wasn't happening, Damon owed him nothing. Ceres Blade? Huh, he thought bitterly. Yeah, right, she can kiss my ass. Gripping the pen, he glared coldly at the paper, defiance burning in his gaze. Kale's patience was growing thin. "Well, get on with it. I don't have all day." "No," Damon muttered, his tone cold and lifeless, a dead look in his eyes. Kale's expression hardened. "What did you just say?" "I said no. I won't sign it." Kale's eyes went icy. "Do it. Now." Damon didn't flinch. "I said no." Despite the tension knotting his stomach, he kept a calm facade, though anger simmered beneath his calm exterior. Kale sighed, his patience finally snapping. "Very well, then." He tossed the brooch in his hand toward Damon, who instinctively caught it. The silver brooch had the Academy's crest with a rune for probation etched on it. "Since you won't leave with dignity, the Academy will force you out." Kale's voice held a cruel satisfaction. "Congratulations, Damon Grey. You are now officially a probationary student. When you inevitably fail the mid-semester evaluation, I'll be here to personally kick you out." Damon's hand shook, his fingers digging into the brooch as Kale continued. "I've seen what you're worth, a failure and nothing more. You'll never amount to anything." Damon's shadow flickered erratically as his rage swelled, his voice cold and cutting. "Some educator you turn out to be, Professor." Kale frowned, but Damon pressed on, his voice steady, fueled by a lifetime of frustration. "You say I'm a failure. Yeah, you're right. I've failed countless times, and I've given up plenty too. But I'm still here, still standing. Call me a failure all you want, but saying I won't amount to anything? That's where you're wrong. You don't get to decide what I can or can't do. His eyes burned with defiance. You have no idea what I've been through just to make it this far. And if I go out, I'll go out kicking and screaming, knowing I gave it my all. Damon's voice rose, his anger spilling over. Yes, I'm a failure, but failure is the crucible I've been forged in. He stood, his glare locked onto Kale. I'm not getting expelled. I'll pass that mid-semester evaluation. And when I do, I'll look you dead in the eye and say. He leaned forward, his voice a low, fierce whisper, screw you. Kale's gaze remained cold and unyielding. With your pathetic amount of credits, even passing won't be enough. You'll need a place in the top 10 to stay, and we both know that isn't happening. Your words are nothing but a dog barking. With a dismissive flick of his wrist, Kale tossed an envelope toward Damon. Now, get out of my office. Damon caught the envelope, his dark eyes flashing with cold fury. He clenched the brooch in his hand and left without another word. Damon stormed out of Professor Kale's office, his hands trembling with barely contained rage. He strode through the hallways, which were mostly empty since most students were in class. If any of them had known that he had talked back, and even made a rude remark to the Academy's most feared professor, they'd likely think him insane. But Damon didn't care. Not about Kale, and certainly not about the prestigious Sarah's blade. None of that mattered. All he cared about was his sister's life, and that came down to one all-encompassing problem: money. There's nothing that money can't buy, he thought bitterly. If you can't buy something with money, it simply means you don't have enough, or you don't know where to find it. I need more zenny, he muttered under his breath. The Academy scholarship provided him with some relief, but even 1,000,000 zenny wouldn't be enough to cover what he needed. He couldn't leave or get expelled, but he had no idea what to do next. Ah, curses! He bit his lip, the weight of his burdens pressing down on him until he felt he might burst. He'd talked big in Kale's office, fueled by his anger, but deep down, he knew how hopeless he felt. Taking a deep breath, he chanted his usual mantra, a quiet whisper to himself. Today was a horrible day. Tomorrow will be worse. Repeating it a few times, he let out a long sigh and found a nearby fountain, sinking down onto the bench beside it. What do I do? How can I? His voice trailed off, heavy with exhaustion. Just then, his shadow flickered, moving strangely, as if waving at him. Damon blinked, watching as it gestured, attempting to communicate. After a moment, he understood. It was pointing toward the system. Damon shook his head with a faint smile. Right. How could I forget about that? Summoning the system panel, he scanned his stats. Most were unchanged, except for 2. Shadow energy had dropped, and even more concerning, shadow hunger had increased to a new level. Alarmed, he checked his condition panel, and relief washed over him when he saw the result. Condition: shadow is full. He sighed, remembering that high shadow hunger could be fatal. I really don't like the idea of perishing, he muttered, glancing down at his shadow, which had returned to behaving normally under the sunlight. Now what? What do I feed you? Flesh to feed you and souls to level up. He frowned. Souls might be hard to come by, but flesh? Well, that's doable within the Academy. We'll start there, just after class. Damon's voice trailed off as he suddenly remembered. Class. His first class, element manipulation, was probably over by now since he'd been late to begin with. But if that was over, it meant... Reaching into his pocket, Damon pulled out a small book bearing the Academy's seal on the back. He opened it, and the pages glowed like a digital screen. This was the Academy Pager, a device with various functions, much like a modern smartphone. Scrolling through the schedule, he groaned. Oh, you gotta be kidding me, just my luck. He closed the pager and stood up, glancing at his shadow. Come on, we have practical multi-attribute combat class next. He sighed heavily. It was one of his least favorite classes. While the theory behind using magic attributes in combat was tolerable, he hated the practicals. This was the class where students showed off their power, and he was always the weakest. And to top it off, he was late. Reluctantly, he walked down a flight of stairs, through a long hallway, and reached an elevator. He stepped inside the enchanted device, pressing the button, and felt the slight drop as it descended. Soon, he arrived at the ground floor, where a massive vaulted door awaited him. Pushing it open, the sunlight spilled in, stretching his shadow across the polished floor. Damon walked past a maze of carefully cultivated flower beds until he reached the Academy's open training grounds. All around, students were launching elemental magic at training dummies or dodging attacks fired from hulking metallic golems. Standing off to the side was the instructor, a beastkin man with brown hair, wolf ears, and a build that radiated both power and control. His sharp blue eyes observed the students with an air of calm authority, his arms crossed as he silently assessed their performances. Damon hesitated, his heart pounding as he took in the scene. He took a deep breath, looking down at his shadow, and nodded. It's now or never. He walked slowly toward the students, keeping his head low and his breathing steady, hoping the beastkin professor wouldn't notice him amid the chaos of other students taking their practicals. Damon's steps were careful, each one weighted with a mild sense of unease as he neared the weapons rack. Just as he was about to blend in with the rest, the professor's deep, booming voice cut through the noise. You are late. Damon froze. The entire training ground fell silent as the professor's voice echoed, commanding instant attention. All the other students halted and turned to look at him, each with a different expression. He didn't need to look up to feel their stares piercing through him. Instead, he frowned and raised his gaze slowly, his expression dark and unyielding. The shadowed look in his black eyes only made him appear more foreboding, casting an unapproachable aura that matched the gloom he radiated. Meeting the professor's gaze, Damon maintained an icy, defiant stare. The professor, unaffected, nodded slightly. What is your name? Damon's heart pounded in his chest, threatening to betray him, but he held firm, his face a mask of cold resolve. Grey. Damon Grey. The professor's eyes narrowed, clearly recognizing the name. Yes, you're that Damon Grey. Damon's expression darkened further, feeling his irritation rise. These bastards are all the same. Looking down on me, huh? He crossed his arms, determined not to let this professor belittle him, especially after what he'd just endured with Cale Blackthorn. So what if I am? He replied, his tone cold and defiant. A few gasps sounded among the students, surprised by his audacity. Marcus and Lark, among them, exchanged shocked glances, clearly not expecting to see Damon standing there, defiant and very much alive. The professor's eyes hardened at Damon's response. His voice grew louder, and a trace of his aura leaked into the air, pressing down with an invisible weight. You are late. Go stand in the corner. Damon felt his knees weaken as the professor's aura bore down on him, leaving him faint. But just as the pressure threatened to overpower him, his shadow moved erratically beneath him, almost as if it absorbed the brunt of the impact, sparing Damon the worst of it. He managed to maintain his cold exterior, though his body trembled under the strain. As he walked to the corner, his shadow wobbled instead of his legs, taking on the weakness he'd hidden from the others. His expression remained icy and grim, undeterred by the professor's display of power. The beastkin professor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Damon's seemingly unaffected response to the aura. On the other side of the training ground, an elf girl with striking white hair watched him with a curious glint in her eyes. Damon, for his part, maintained a calm facade as the professor announced the continuation of class. Slowly, the other students' attention returned to their training, allowing Damon to stand unnoticed in the corner of the grounds. He let out a quiet sigh of relief, casting a quick glance at his shadow. It weakly raised a hand to give him a thumbs up, bending over like an old man, its shape quivering as if coughing. Damon shot at a concerned look. Are you okay? Talking to one's own shadow would be considered madness by most, but Damon wasn't like most people. Not all shadows had a mind of their own, so he figured he wasn't crazy. Or at least he hoped so. His shadow wobbled unsteadily but puffed out its non-existent chest, striking a pose as if to say, piece of cake. Damon smirked. Thanks. You really saved me back there. Would have been embarrassing to act all high and mighty, only to end up on my knees. Especially with so many girls watching. I could die of shame. The shadow waved a hand dismissively, as if to say, nah, no big deal. Damon nodded, but quickly furrowed his brow. Now act normal, before someone notices. The shadow seemed offended, hesitating before grudgingly returning to its regular, motionless form. Damon sighed with relief, thankful no one had seen him talking to his own shadow. To look more inconspicuous, he pulled out his pager and started scrolling through it, pretending to be absorbed in something. I really hate this class, he muttered quietly, though he knew his shadow was listening. His gaze drifted across the field and landed on a girl with radiant golden hair, a sword in hand, exuding a glow that seemed to light up the world around her. Her eyes were a luminous gold, marked with a symbol resembling the sun. That's the number 1 first year, Evangeline Brightwater. She has a light attribute, one of the more powerful ones, so, yeah, nothing special, he said with a touch of sarcasm. She's number 1, after all. A bitter smile crossed his face. Not like she's just my age with more power and status than me. He shook his head, forcing his gaze away. Whatever. The shadow stirred slightly but stayed in place as Damon continued. Apparently, she only cares about fighting someone stronger than her, but no one among us first years can match her. Maybe Sylvia Moonvale. He glanced at his shadow, still holding his pager to maintain the appearance of scrolling through it, before looking toward an elf girl with long white hair and steely gray eyes. That's Sylvia Moonvale. She's from Iorva's, the Verdant Continent. From the looks of it, she's probably noble, most of them are. You don't become the second seat by being a poor commoner. He sighed, a softer tone in his voice. She has a lunar attribute, like my sister. Seeing her really reminds me of Luna. It kind of pushes me to hold on, but it also makes me wish Luna had a chance to shine too. The shadow stayed silent, almost as if listening, as Damon's thoughts grew heavier. His gaze shifted again, this time hardening as he looked across the training ground. That guy over there is Xander Ravenscroft. Damon's voice grew colder, a hint of resentment underlying his words. Xander Ravenscroft was tall, well-built, with a confident air. His brown hair and piercing blue eyes radiated charm and presence. Damon couldn't help but feel a pang of inadequacy. Xander was the sort who always seemed to attract attention, and he did so effortlessly. He has a gravity attribute, and comes from Solthean, just like me. Oh, and Evangeline too, I guess. Pretty sure Xander has a crush on her. I mean, it's kind of obvious. The shadow shifted, as if asking him a question. Me a crush. Damon let out a snort. I don't have a crush on anyone, wait. Actually, I do. I have a crush on money. That last line lifted his mood a bit, and he let himself chuckle, feeling a bit of the tension ease away. Damon turned his gaze toward a beastkin girl with dark hair, streaked with white highlights, and animal ears perched atop her head, a trademark of her kin. She struck a training dummy with her claws, sending off sparks of electricity. That's Leona Veilfire. She's from the wild continent, Lothria. Her attribute's called the Storm Attribute. She's rank 4th. He trailed off, eyeing her with a mix of curiosity and caution. He continued introducing the top 10 students in his class to his shadow, almost as if giving a newcomer a rundown of the group. His descriptions were laced with occasional side comments, a mix of admiration and sarcasm as he assessed each one. While Damon talked, the professor called an end to the training session. It's time for today's practicals to conclude, but since we have a bit more time, I'll let 2 of our top students demonstrate a duel using elemental magic. Watch closely and learn. He nodded toward Evangeline and Sylvia, gesturing for them to step onto a makeshift stage. The 2 girls stood opposite each other, unarmed but brimming with intensity. Damon sighed, barely glancing up as they readied themselves for combat. Instead, he kept his attention fixed on his pager, scrolling through it aimlessly. Watching their duel wouldn't help him, not when he'd already seen them fight countless times before. To him, they were just reminders of what he lacked. He kept his head down, absently scrolling, as the sounds of battle began to fill the air. He caught glimpses of flashing light and felt the bursts of energy, the clash of light and lunar magic igniting the field. His shadow reacted to the flashes, shifting slightly in agitation, but Damon ignored it, eyes firmly on his pager. The sounds grew louder, the gasps of students around him more intense than usual, signaling that today's duel was particularly fierce. But Damon stayed nonchalant, almost tuning out the spectacle. "Hey, watch out!" The professor's voice cut through the noise too late. Without even lifting his head, Damon's shadow moved instinctively in sync with his body. He dodged a beam of light, shifting to the side just in time, then ducked another, feeling the heat graze past him as he leaned away from the next. Finally, he sidestepped, avoiding the last flash by mere inches, as it seared the ground behind him. The training grounds fell silent, students and professors alike staring in shock. Damon remained still, his eyes still on his pager, expression unbothered, as if nothing had happened. It took a moment for him to process it all, his mind finally catching up to his reflexive dodges. Oh, well, what just happened? The realization of what had just happened finally caught up with Damon. He stood there, holding his pager in one hand and an envelope from Kale in the other. His gaze drifted to the scorched mark on the ground, where a beam of light had seared the earth just inches away from him. His face went pale. That could have been him. Sensing every eye on him, Damon kept his expression tightly controlled, masking his fear with a hardened glare. His dark eyes held a glint of anger, a front to conceal the panic bubbling inside. His gaze shifted to Evangeline Brightwater, who stood frozen, her expression a mix of unease and shock. It was clear she hadn't meant for her attack to go astray. Beside her was Sylvia Moonvale, who met his stare coolly, while the other students remained silent, processing what they'd just witnessed. Damon's heart pounded as if it might burst, but he maintained his composure, unwilling to show any weakness before his peers, especially not to the nobles. With an exaggerated sigh, he looked toward the professor and lifted his pager. "Your time is up, Professor. I have another class to get to." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked off the training grounds, ignoring the murmurs that followed him. He could feel their stares, heavy on his back. "Don't look back. Keep walking," he reminded himself, teeth gritted against the tension in his chest. The professor called something after him, but Damon was too rattled to register it. He simply kept walking until he reached a quiet spot beneath a tree, finally letting out a long, shaky breath. Looking down at his shadow, he murmured, "Oh, my goddess, praise the Lady of Doom, mistress of fate, bringer of death. I almost joined her today." His heart continued to hammer as a shadow shifted beside him, waving dismissively as if to reassure him. Damon chuckled, feeling a surprising surge of gratitude. "Thank you. May the goddess reward you. You really saved me back there," he whispered, patting his chest. He couldn't explain it, but he was certain his shadow had reacted to Evangeline's light magic and allowed him to dodge what could have been a fatal attack. He sighed in relief, muttering to himself, "Another close call with the healers because of a noble. Damn them." His shadow seemed to agree, mimicking a fist as if cursing out the nobles itself. Damon smirked. "Still, thank you. I don't know what you are, but I'm grateful. Even if you might be dangerous, you still saved my life." He tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Now, let's get through the day and find you some food." Opening his system panel, he noticed his shadow's energy level had dropped further with a new status update. "Condition: Shadow is mildly hungry," he read aloud, then touched his own stomach as it growled in unison. "Guess I'm a little famished, too. Let's finish the next class and then get something to eat for me." At this, his shadow raised a hand in exasperation, and Damon chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on, relax. I'll sneak into the dorm's kitchen storage later and swipe a whole cow for you. Trust me." His shadow crossed its arms, clearly unimpressed by the promise of a whole cow. Damon rolled his eyes, still scrolling through his pager. "Ah, I'm not eating breakfast is catching up to me," he muttered, checking his schedule. "Let's see. Next up is a theory class. Great, it's the history of the Demon Wars." His stomach grumbled again, but he ignored it, talking to his shadow to distract himself. So, the demons and goddess races have been at war forever, though it always feels like the class is just propaganda for the goddess race. Don't worry, it's almost like listening to a story, with a bunch of dates thrown in. As they walked, his shadow continued to make subtle, nearly imperceptible gestures in response, keeping him company in the silence. Damon's mind was plagued with worries, yet there was a strange comfort in knowing he had someone, something, to confide in, even if it was just his shadow. It was the smallest solace, but it made the solitude easier to bear. Perhaps that's why people kept pets. In his case, he was just a loner talking to his shadow. Nothing unusual about that, right? Oh, right, he muttered to himself, remembering the envelope Professor Blackthorn had given him. I forgot to look at this. He glanced down at his shadow. What do you think is inside? Couldn't be my results. He already threw those at me. Probably has something to do with me being a probationary student now. Finding a secluded bench beneath a tree, Damon settled down and carefully opened the envelope. As he scanned the contents, his brow furrowed. Cale Blackthorn, that bastard. The envelope contained a list of regulations he was now subject to as a probationary student. Most of the rules were tedious, but one line stood out, making his stomach twist. He was required to wear a probationary student brooch on his uniform, prominently displayed for all to see. Damon's heart sank. It was a blatant act of shaming, a way to mark him as lesser than his peers. They might as well have slapped a sign on him, reading thief, and paraded him naked around the campus square. His lips quivered. He had almost been in a decent mood, but this was a cold reminder that good things didn't come his way. Lowering his head, he pulled the brooch from his pocket, its insignia gleaming in the sunlight. He considered not wearing it, but Cale would no doubt use that as an excuse to make his life even harder. He sighed, voice barely above a whisper. At least I still have the privileges of a golden ticket student. The weight of it pressed on him, his chest tightening with each breath. His shadow waved gently, as if to console him. Yeah, I'm fine, he muttered, brushing himself off as he stood. Let's get to class. I'm sure everyone else has already beaten me there by now. Damon hurried through the Academy's main building, mentally cursing the time he'd wasted reading over Professor Cale Blackthorn's letter. By the time he entered the history of the Demon Wars classroom, it was nearly full. Ironically, despite being the first to leave, he was now the last to arrive. Relieved to find the professor absent, he slipped through the door and hugged the shadows along the wall, moving as quietly as possible to avoid drawing attention. The classroom's tiered seating allowed him to climb to his usual spot at the very back, safely distant from the nobles clustered toward the front. As he settled in, he let out a breath, grateful no one had noticed him, especially after the spectacle from the last class. Glancing at his shadow, he whispered, "Looks like we made it." The faint light cast his shadow along the wall, gesturing back as if responding. Are you asking if I like this class?" Damon murmured, a faint smile breaking his usually gloomy expression. "I actually do. It's pure theory, so mana levels don't matter. Plus, the professor's a commoner like me. And he seems like a nice guy. Never talked to him, but still." His shadow moved faintly as if listening, and Damon felt his stomach grumble, distracting him. Could really use some food right about now. Almost on cue, the system notification appeared in his vision. Shadow, 49. Shadow hunger levels, 26%. Condition, shadow is hungry. With a sigh, Damon noted the rise in shadow hunger. "I'll feed you later," he whispered to his shadow, though it crossed its arms as if less than impressed with him. Trying to ignore his own hunger, he shifted his attention back to the class. Below, he noticed Lark Bonaire sitting with Marcus Fayjoy and the others, all of them gathered around Xander Ravenscroft like loyal satellites. Marcus shot occasional glances his way, his expression a mix of anger and apprehension, while Lark looked at him with cold fury, as if Damon had wronged him without fair retribution. Damon met Lark's glare, his mind drifting back to the memory of being pushed down a ravine by that same group. The seething resentment made his blood boil. He wanted payback, and he wouldn't forget. Xander, however, seemed oblivious, Or maybe he simply didn't care. Damon's eyes narrowed, watching the boy who remained serene and unaffected by the tension around him. The door swung open, and the professor finally entered. Professor Chrome was a kind-looking old man, with a long white beard, glasses perched on his nose, and a pristine white robe accented with gold trim. His gentle presence radiated warmth, as if he were everyone's grandfather. Oh, well, hello everyone. Settle down. Class is about to begin. He greeted, his jovial tone melting the tension in the room like a warm breeze. Damon found himself actually enjoying Professor Chrome's lecture. Despite his usual lack of regard for others, he had a rare respect for this particular teacher. Professor Chrome was living proof that even commoners could rise to prominence. Some said he'd even rejected a position at the imperial court to teach here, choosing instead to guide the Academy's next generation of fighters against the demon races. The professor launched into the lesson, recounting centuries of the demon wars, detailing famous demon lords and the goddess race heroes who had fought against them. Damon found the topic intriguing, though he grew slightly irritated by the occasional propaganda about the goddess race's supposed superiority. The Academy's contradictions amused him. Here they boasted of supremacy, while in other classes they emphasized the sheer terror of demons' speed, strength, and lethality. Even a lesser demon, a being near the bottom of the hierarchy, could easily rip a human to shreds. Typical Victor's history, he thought. I'm sure the demons have their own stories, just as exaggerated. Professor Chrome continued, occasionally calling on students to answer questions, correcting them warmly if they missed the mark. Damon listened, feeling his stomach growl, a hollow, insistent reminder of his hunger. He stifled a yawn, which must have caught the professor's attention despite his spot in the far back, alone in the shadows. Ah yes, the young man at the back. Professor Chrome called out cheerfully. Can you tell us what you know about the legendary demon Lord Ashcroft? It took Damon a second to register. He blinked, realizing the professor's expectant gaze was on him. His shadow raised a hand, as if nudging him to get up. Damon rose, his expression as gloomy as ever. Though his hunger made it hard to focus, he recounted the familiar tale of Ashcroft, a name known across the world, a figure more myth than mere history. Ashcroft, he began, is known as the Demon Lord of Domination. He's said to be the strongest demon lord that's ever existed. Long ago, the goddess races called Centros home. It was the heart of all things. But Ashcroft took it over in the name of the demon races. He felt the attention of the entire class on him now, as he continued. Ashcroft conquered Centros, renaming it the Demon Continent. His power and ambition made him a real threat, and he aimed to conquer all the known world. When he set foot on Solthean, he devastated everything. It was only when he reached the temple of the goddess that he was finally stopped. In that temple, he spoke taboo words before her statue. Damon's stomach growled, loud enough that he winced, but he kept going. They say that as he uttered those words, the statue glowed, and Ashcroft was erased from existence. The demon armies retreated after that, but it wasn't the end. The demons prayed to their god, and he gathered what remained of Ashcroft, leaving them with a prophecy. The Dominator shall return. Taking a deep breath, Damon finished. To this day, the demons await Ashcroft's return. Of course, later historians have debunked this as just a fairy tale, saying someone like Ashcroft could never have existed. With that, Damon sat down, feeling the weight of everyone's stares, but he ignored them, his mind now preoccupied with his own gnawing hunger. Professor Chrome, however, looked pleased, his eyes twinkling with interest. Well done, young man, he said warmly. And yes, many say it's just a myth, but myths, as we know, often hold grains of truth. The professor's gaze lingered thoughtfully on Damon before he turned back to the board to continue the lesson. The class finally came to an end, and Damon bolted from his seat as if sitting on pins and needles. Without so much as a backward glance, he rushed out of the room, making a beeline for the cafeteria. Hunger clawed at his insides, and he felt as though he could eat an entire feast. The cafeteria was sparsely populated when he arrived, allowing him to grab a seat in a corner without much trouble. Wasting no time, he piled his tray high with twice the amount of food he usually consumed and ate with uncharacteristic gusto. The first spread disappeared quickly, but even as he swallowed the last bite, his stomach growled in protest. Frustrated, he returned for more servings, several more, in fact, until the sheer volume of his consumption began to draw stares. By now, the cafeteria had filled with students, and Damon's voracious appetite became the subject of murmured conversations. Even the beastkin, known for their ferocious hunger, watched him in disbelief. A human eating this much? It seemed impossible. Damon continued until his stomach felt bloated, almost painfully so, yet the gnawing hunger refused to subside. He took another bite, feeling like he might throw up from how full he was, but his stomach growled again, sending a wave of frustration through him. His head felt light, his vision blurred for a moment, shifting into black and white before snapping back to normal. The sensation left him unsettled, his mounting irritation bubbling just beneath the surface. He stood for what felt like the 8th time to clear his table and head back for more. Each serving grew larger than the last, but it didn't matter. The hunger remained. When he reached the counter, he grabbed a new tray, ignoring the maids who offered to serve him. He preferred to do it himself. As he moved, distracted by his hunger, he bumped into someone. "Sorry," Damon muttered gloomily without looking up, but his apology barely left his lips before the other person's voice rang out, sharp and angry. The tone alone made Damon's blood boil. In a blur of rage, he raised the tray and smashed it into the face of the person he had bumped into, Lark Bonaire. Damon's heart surged with sudden, uncontrollable anger, and before he could think, he followed up with a powerful kick that sent Lark flying into a service trolley. The maid pushing the trolley let out a startled yelp as Lark collided with it, spilling food everywhere. Damon moved as if to strike again, but the commotion had drawn too much attention, and he hesitated. He blinked, shocked by the sheer force behind his actions. His strength had caught him off guard. Glancing down, he saw his shadow behaving normally, yet something about it made his tired eyes narrow in suspicion. Lark, covered in food and seething, scrambled to his feet, ready to retaliate. "I'll kill you for this, Grey." He spat, his voice dripping with venom. Before Lark could charge, someone stepped in, grabbing his arm and holding him back. Damon glanced up to see Marcus Fayjoy, who wore a strained expression as he tried to calm his friend. "Let go, Lark," Marcus urged. "Not here." "Let me go," Lark shouted, his voice echoing through the now silent cafeteria. "I'll kill this bastard today." Damon's dark eyes grew colder at the threat, and his lips parted, ready to retort, but another voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's enough." The cold, aloof tone belonged to none other than Xander Ravenscroft. His mere presence silenced the room, and his piercing gaze made Lark stiffen. "You're causing a scene. This behavior is unbefitting of a noble." Lark froze, his fury doused by Xander's disapproving glare. Muttering under his breath, he shot Damon one last, icy glare before stepping back. Damon glanced at Xander briefly, then turned away, his voice low as he muttered, "Not if I kill you first." Leaving the cafeteria, Damon's stomach still churned with hunger despite the absurd amount of food he had consumed. The gnawing sensation persisted, an unrelenting ache that followed him as he exited the Academy's main building. He cast a weary glance at his shadow, his frustration spilling over. "Why? Why am I still so hungry?" he demanded. The shadow stirred, shrugging its shoulders in response. Then, with a pointed gesture, it tapped its non-existent stomach, as if to say, "You're not the only one." Damon held his temple, his exhaustion mounting as he tried to soothe the persistent ache of hunger. "Right, sorry. I'll find you something to eat later. Just hold on a little longer." His voice carried a weary edge, but he felt a flicker of determination to keep his strange companion satisfied. Afterward, he headed to the library, spending some time poring over books to familiarize himself with the concepts his classmates already seemed to know by heart. He flipped through pages on dangerous herbs and wild flora, hoping the knowledge might one day be useful. The gnawing hunger, however, was a constant distraction. His stomach growled incessantly, forcing him to miss a few classes as he finally gave up and retreated to his dormitory with a small stack of books in hand. The dormitory hallways were deserted, most students still attending their lessons. Damon moved quickly and quietly, wary of the head maid catching him. He could already hear her sharp tone reprimanding him for skipping class, and he wasn't in the mood for a lecture. He ascended to the higher floors where his room was, unlocking the door with his pager before slipping inside. He collapsed onto the bed, drained. His stomach felt full to the point of discomfort, yet the hunger hadn't waned. It gnawed at him like an unrelenting beast. As his eyes fluttered shut, he caught a glimpse of his shadow moving freely about the room. He clutched his stomach, muttered something incoherent, and finally fell asleep. When he opened his eyes again, the room was cloaked in darkness. Damon groaned and fumbled for his pager, its faint glow illuminating the screen. Midnight. He'd been asleep for hours. The darkness didn't bother him. Oddly enough, it felt soothing, almost like a second skin. Still, out of habit, he tapped the light switch on the wall. The sudden brightness stung his eyes, but his attention was quickly drawn to the far corner of the room. His shadow stood there, arms crossed, radiating displeasure. Its stance was practically screaming annoyance. Damon scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry. I overslept. I didn't mean to. And shouldn't you have woken me up?" The shadow's form tensed, its fists balling up as it began a dramatic display of complaints. It gestured wildly, stomping its foot and pacing along the walls and ceiling, as if trying to express just how frustrating its day had been. Damon sighed, already feeling a strange sense of familiarity with the peculiar entity. Yeah, I get it," he muttered, holding his head as the lightheadedness from his hunger returned. Despite everything, he cracked a small smile. "I was feeling hungry myself. And hey, it's late enough now that the head maid is probably asleep. Let's head to the dorm kitchen. There's a pantry and a cold room. You can have your pick of the meat." The shadow paused its rant, its arms relaxing as it stroked its chin thoughtfully. After a moment of deliberation, it gave a slow, reluctant nod. Damon chuckled softly, shaking his head. "All right then, but we have to be discreet. Can't let anyone catch us." Quietly, Damon opened the door to his dorm room. His shadow slipped seamlessly back into its usual place, clinging to him as if it had always belonged there. Together, they stepped into the dimly lit halls. Damon silently made his way down the dimly lit halls, half afraid the head maid would appear out of nowhere. The war halls carried an eerie stillness at night, shadows stretching across the walls and corners in a way that would unsettle most people. Yet, Damon found himself oddly comforted by the darkness. Where others might see obscurity, Damon saw clarity. To his eyes, the mild darkness was as vivid as daylight. Every detail of the lavish carpets, intricate marble floors, and towering walls of the dormitory stood out. Still, he kept his footsteps light, careful not to disturb the quiet or alert anyone to his presence. The other students were likely already asleep, exhausted from a demanding day of classes and activities. The war halls, reserved for the Academy's elite, had an air of exclusivity. The uppermost floors housed top-performing students like Xander Ravenscroft, Evangeline Brightwater, Student Council President Lilith Astronova, and the more accomplished seniors. These floors were pristine and spacious, a testament to the privilege and prestige of their residents. Damon, by virtue of his golden ticket, had been granted access to these floors despite his unconventional scores. Below these heights, the floors accommodated nobility and students with excellent academic credits, but none matched the luxury of the upper floors. There were other dormitories scattered throughout the academy, but none had the same aura of excellence and intimidation. Damon had never ventured out this late before. Most nights, he collapsed into his bed after grueling days, often too tired to do anything but sleep. On his hardest days, when trials piled up, he would drift off with tear stains still drying on his cheeks. His struggles had left him gloomy, hardened, and weary. Yet tonight, something about the emptiness of the halls and the strange comfort he felt in the darkness gave him a semblance of calm. As he reached the elevator, he paused. Using it would be quicker, but it was also risky. If the headmaid found out, he'd be in for a nightmare. Among the student body, Professor Cale Blackthorn was a figure of fear, but for Damon and others in the war halls, the headmaid was the true terror. Her wrath was legendary. Turning to his shadow, Damon whispered, "Don't go anywhere. We just have to sneak down a few floors. As long as the headmaid doesn't see us, we're golden." The shadow gave him a playful thumbs up and exaggerated a tiptoeing motion, earning a wry smile from Damon. Despite the unnerving day he'd spent with this peculiar entity, its antics had started to endear it to him. It was strange, but the companionship felt genuine. Still, Damon couldn't ignore the gnawing fear deep in his gut. The changes to his body were unpredictable. His insatiable hunger weighed on him, no matter how much food he consumed. Worse, his vision occasionally shifted, the world losing all color and plunging into stark black and white. Every symptom seemed linked to the shadow's hunger, an ominous connection he couldn't fully understand. "Its hunger is affecting me too," Damon thought grimly. He had been keeping an eye on the shadow energy stat in his system. It was dropping steadily, and the shadow's hunger was growing more demanding. He glanced at the shadow again, its form twitching slightly, as if restless. "I'll feed you soon," Damon muttered softly, more to himself than to his companion. With a deep breath, he began descending the stairs, the faint sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet, empty halls. The journey down the lower floors was uneventful. Damon moved as quietly as a mouse, his soft footsteps barely audible against the cold marble floors. The halls were eerily silent, and shadows loomed in every corner, yet he felt no unease. The darkness had become strangely familiar, even comforting. He passed by the dining halls, their grandeur muted in the dim light. Finally, he reached the kitchen. Pushing the door open, he entered cautiously, confident that no one would be there at this hour. The sound of munching broke the silence, a feral, almost desperate noise of someone devouring food. Damon's senses heightened as he turned toward the source. His sharp vision pierced the dimness, landing on a figure seated at a table. Before he could fully process what he saw, the figure turned, and Damon found himself face to face with the source of the noise. Her features were immediately distinguishable. Black hair streaked with white highlights, sharp animal ears perched atop her head, and a lean, athletic frame that spoke of raw power and grace. Her physique was striking, her toned body complemented by curves that would have made most men stumble over their words. She was Leona Veilfire, the Beastkin girl. She didn't seem to notice him at first, too focused on shoveling food into her mouth as if it might disappear at any moment. Damon stared at her, his exhaustion adding to his disbelief at the scene. Suddenly, his stomach growled, a deep, guttural sound that echoed in the still kitchen. The noise was deafening in the quiet, and Leona froze mid-bite, her golden eyes snapping toward him. "Oh, who's there?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Show yourself." Her gaze narrowed, her frown deepening. "I can see you. Make yourself known." Damon noticed the faint crackle of sparks forming around her hands. She was poised to strike, her body coiled like a predator ready to pounce. Despite knowing he was no match for her strength, his pride as a teenager wouldn't let him back down easily. He quickly glanced around and spotted the light switch near the door. How convenient. Without hesitation, he reached for it and flicked it on. The room flooded with light, and Damon instantly felt the comfort of the shadows slip away. His own shadow returned to behaving normally, no longer stirring unnaturally. Leona blinked against the sudden brightness, and when her eyes adjusted, she took in Damon's disheveled appearance. Her expression softened, and the tension in her posture melted away. Food still smeared her mouth as she relaxed back into her seat without a word. Damon averted his gaze, his eyes falling on the other doors in the kitchen. Two of them led to the pantry and the cold room, his intended destination. But with Leona sitting there, watching, he couldn't exactly sneak off unnoticed. Leona, however, didn't seem in any hurry to leave. She casually continued her feast, completely unbothered by his presence. Guess I'll have to eat something until she's gone, Damon thought. His hunger was too overwhelming to wait her out. He wandered the kitchen, checking the usual spots where the maids stored leftover pastries and prepared meals. To his shock, every shelf, every container was empty. Not a single scrap of food remained. How was all that food gone, he wondered. The maids always cooked in excess to cater to the whims of the elite students. Yet now, there was nothing. His shadow, ever the silent observer, pointed directly at Leona. No, it can't be, Damon thought, staring at her incredulously. I mean, she's a beastkin, but no one eats that much, right? Not to mention she's a girl. There's just no way. Yet the evidence was irrefutable. Plates and bowls surrounded her, and she was still eating with gusto, even humming a little tune between bites. He sighed heavily. Guess I'll have to cook. At least the raw ingredients were untouched. The kitchen was enormous, fully stocked with an array of supplies, and the pantry offered even more if needed. Damon gathered everything he could use, setting the ingredients on the counter. Leona glanced at him, her golden eyes curious, but she didn't stop eating. Damon got to work, prepping the meal with methodical efficiency. His knife sliced through vegetables with precision, and within minutes, his ingredients were ready. Despite his exhaustion and ravenous hunger, he moved quickly, determined to cook enough to satisfy the unrelenting void in his stomach. No matter how much he ate, his hunger never seemed to wane, a troubling realization he tried to ignore. With his prep complete, Damon lit the stove and began to cook. The rhythmic sounds of chopping, sizzling, and stirring filled the kitchen, blending with the soft hum of Leona's continued feast. The kitchen was massive, far more extravagant than what one would expect from a dorm kitchen. Outfitted with state-of-the-art gadgets imported from the magic continent of Verona, it was a place designed for luxury. Damon, however, barely knew how to use any of it. Such opulence was far removed from the life of a commoner, and he felt out of place even standing there. The only thing he recognized was the stove, and that was only because it looked simple enough to operate. He had seen the maids light it a few times before, and that knowledge proved sufficient. He started with something straightforward, stir-frying meat and vegetables. Tossing them in a pan, he added a mix of seasoning and spices, letting the aroma fill the air. It wasn't complicated, and Damon found the process surprisingly manageable. Next, he cooked rice, a lot of it. He wasn't planning on holding back tonight. A hearty soup with generous chunks of meat followed, its simmering broth adding another layer to the kitchen's intoxicating smells. Finally, he noticed some pre-sliced potatoes, likely prepped by the maids earlier. Grinning at his luck, he fried them to a golden crisp and whipped up a rich tomato sauce to pair with them. The kitchen soon became a storm of activity, the clatter of pots and pans blending with the hiss of sizzling oil. The air grew thick with the mouth-watering aroma of Damon's efforts. Seated at the table, Leona Veilfire paused in her feast, her sharp senses drawn to the enticing smells. Her chewing slowed, and though she continued to eat, her previous enthusiasm waned. The food she had devoured moments ago now seemed dull in comparison. Leona's golden eyes flicked toward Damon occasionally, watching as he moved with surprising efficiency for someone who claimed no familiarity with a luxurious kitchen. Her mouth watered despite herself, and she cursed her treacherous appetite for betraying her pride. Meanwhile, Damon worked tirelessly, barely able to keep up with his own hunger. His stomach grumbled incessantly, so he began eating as he cooked. Whatever finished first went straight into his mouth. But his cooking outpaced his eating, and before long, he had a mountain of food prepared. Finally done, Damon glanced around for a place to eat. The counter with its fancy high stools seemed unwelcoming, and the idea of retreating to the dining area was unthinkable. No way. If the head maid catches me in there, I'm dead. That left only one option, the table where Leona Veilfire was sitting. His face twisted into a grimace at the thought. Sharing a table with a noble wasn't appealing in the slightest. He could already imagine her looking down on him with disdain, her nose wrinkled in disgust. But then another thought pushed through his reservations. This isn't her table. It's Academy property. All students are equal here. With those words to steel his resolve, Damon picked up the first tray of food and set it on the table. After several trips back and forth, he finally had his entire feast laid out. The spread was immense, the faint smoke curling upward, carrying an irresistible aroma. One might think it was prepared for a large party of adventurers, yet it was all meant for one ravenous teenager. Adding the remnants of Leona's meal, the table looked more like the aftermath of a banquet. Leona kept her eyes fixed on her own food, or at least she tried to. Despite her best efforts, her mouth watered, and her gaze kept drifting to Damon's dishes. The smells were maddening, her beastkin senses heightening her awareness of every savory detail. Sitting so close to Damon's food was torture, as if she could almost taste it just by breathing. Damon, for his part, made a deliberate effort to avoid looking at her. He didn't want any trouble with any self-entitled noble. But the truth was, he found it hard to focus because she was stunningly beautiful, and to make things worse, she was still in her pajamas. The realization had only dawned on him while he was cooking, and now it nagged at the edge of his thoughts. His stomach growled, louder this time, breaking the silence. Without further hesitation, Damon dove into his meal like a beast unleashed. He started with utensils, but quickly abandoned them, shoveling fries, chunks of meat, rice, and stir-fried vegetables into his mouth with his hands. Leona stopped eating entirely, her golden eyes sparkling with a strange curiosity as she watched him devour his food. Her mouth watered, and for a moment, she seemed entranced. Then she shook her head as if snapping herself out of a daze and returned to nibbling on her pastries and cold sausages. Compared to Damon's flavorful dishes, her meal seemed bland and lifeless. Meanwhile, Damon was lost in his own frenzy. His lips glistened with grease, and he attacked his food with such intensity that even the stir-fry was not spared. But his body reached its limit before his hunger could fully subside. He leaned back, his stomach bloated and his movements sluggish. Despite the mountain of food he had consumed, his stomach still growled faintly. Standing up, he glanced down and saw his shadow flickering tiredly, almost as if it shared his exhaustion. But Damon couldn't eat another bite. The thought of food made him nauseous. He needed fresh air, or he'd risk losing everything he'd just eaten. He scanned the kitchen and chose the garden door. The dining room door was off limits, too risky with the head maid potentially nearby. He didn't even consider the dorm back entrance. It was undoubtedly locked at this hour. The garden door creaked open, and Damon stepped outside. The cool night air brushed against his face, offering immediate relief. The garden was serene, filled with vibrant flowers, a scattering of fountains, and carefully trimmed green shrubs adorned with rose vines as a barrier from the outside. He walked to the nearest fountain, holding his hand over his mouth as waves of nausea hit him. Sitting on the fountain's edge, he tried to steady himself. His shadow danced erratically at his feet, shifting between lethargy and strange bursts of aggression. Damon took deep breaths, trying to calm the unease building in his chest. Fear gnawed at him, not just from his shadow's unpredictable behavior, but from the isolation he felt. He trusted no one, neither in the academy nor beyond its walls. He couldn't share his plight with anyone. He was all alone. Just stay calm, bury it all, and keep a cool head. After several minutes, his head cleared, and he felt stable enough to return. Pushing open the kitchen door, Damon froze. Leona Veilfire was gone, and so was the rest of his food. That damn beastkin ate my food. He shook his head. He wasn't going to eat it anyway. At least she's gone. With the kitchen finally empty, Damon moved quickly. He made his way to the cold room. It was time to feed his shadow. The Academy's kitchen was massive, outfitted with every amenity imaginable. Especially in War Hall, the dormitory reserved for royals, nobles, and the Academy's elite students. Among its many features was the cold room, a vast space kept frozen to store a variety of meats. Damon pushed open the heavy door and was met with an imposing sight. Large vaulted doors, each one radiating an icy chill. He hesitated in front of them, his hand hovering over the handle as he debated whether to proceed. His stomach growled loudly, and his shadow flickered erratically on the floor, its movements almost agitated. Gritting his teeth, Damon clenched the handle and yanked the doors open. A blast of cold air rushed out, sending a shiver through his body as bright white lights illuminated the interior. The cold room was enormous, the walls coated in frost that shimmered under the lights. Rows of processed animal carcasses hung from metal hooks. Cows, goats, and other creatures, their forms preserved in the biting cold. Crates filled with smaller cuts of meat were stacked neatly in the corners. The air was thick with the scent of raw flesh, sharp and metallic. Damon stepped inside cautiously, his shadow extending itself across the frosty floor, moving independently as if surveying the room. His head throbbed, and a wave of fatigue washed over him, even though he'd spent the entire day sleeping. "Hey, come on over here," Damon called to his shadow. The shadow retreated from its wandering and stopped in front of him, its vague form quivering slightly. "Let's go for that one. It's big enough and should be good to eat," Damon said, pointing at a frozen cow carcass, its head already removed. The shadow slithered toward the cow, circling it with a curious energy. Then it stopped. Damon waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Nothing happened. Frustration bubbled up inside him. "What? Why aren't you eating?" The shadow shook its head, a gesture that seemed both annoyed and reluctant. It pointed at the cow with a tendril-like limb, its movements deliberate. Damon's patience snapped. "What do you mean you can't eat that?" The shadow crossed its arms, as if it were just as frustrated as he was. Damon pressed his fingers to his temples, massaging away the throbbing pain as he took a deep breath to calm himself. "Okay, fine. No problem. If beef won't work, there's mutton, fish, and plenty of other options." He pointed toward a hanging sheep carcass. "Eat that." The shadow glided over to the sheep, circling it in the same manner as before. Once again, it refused to eat. Damon's lips pressed into a thin line, his body trembling, whether from the cold, his own gnawing hunger, or sheer irritation. He wasn't sure. He tried directing the shadow to other meats, pork, fish, and even crates of small game. But no matter what he offered, it wouldn't eat. Worse, the hunger emanating from the shadow seemed to grow stronger, and Damon realized with a sinking feeling that he was being affected by it too. "That's why I can't get full no matter how much I eat." A shiver ran down his spine as he recalled the system's warning. If your shadow is not fed, you will perish. His heart sank, and his breathing quickened. What do I do? Oh, goddess, what do I do?" Fear gripped him. He dropped to his knees on the icy floor, clutching his head. His thoughts spiraled as he struggled to find a solution. What do I feed it? Am I going to live like this? Will I die? The horror of his situation weighed heavily on him. He could feel it pressing down, suffocating him. As he sat there in despair, his shadow moved closer. A tendril rose from the floor and waved at him, catching his attention. Damon looked up, his face pale. The shadow gestured to its chest and flexed as if mimicking strength. Damon stared at it, his brows furrowed. "It's trying to tell me something, to be strong, to not panic." Roughly guessing the shadow's intent, Damon forced himself to take a steadying breath. Okay, I'll figure this out." But as he looked around the cold room, surrounded by countless pounds of meat the shadow wouldn't touch, a nagging doubt remained. What if I can't? Damon smiled faintly, his lips trembling as he fought back the lump in his throat. His chest tightened, and tears threatened to spill, but he swallowed them down with sheer willpower. "Yeah, thanks," he murmured, directing his words at the shadow. "This isn't the time for a mental breakdown. I need to keep a cool head." "So, you can't eat beef. Maybe you have a different diet. Souls and flesh, right? I just need to figure out what kind." With that resolve, Damon snapped himself out of his despair, his mind shifting gears as he began considering a plan of action. He stood up, brushing off his knees. "I need to monitor my state and document everything I find. The system panel should give me accurate measurements." Leaving the cold room, Damon flicked off the lights and walked back to the kitchen. The fluorescent lights clicked off, casting the area in darkness as he climbed the stairs to his room. Once inside, he activated the system panel again, his tired eyes scanning through the information with a sense of urgency. The interface displayed a detailed breakdown of his shadow's hunger. Hunger levels: 0% to 20% hunger, safe range. The shadow is under control. 20% to 50% hunger, increased temptation to feed. Minor stat boosts: 50% to 80% hunger, loss of partial control. Significant power boosts: 90% to 100% hunger. Shadow becomes ravenous, fully takes control. Immediate risk of losing humanity. Damon sighed, his shoulders slumping. His hunger was already at 49%. He was dangerously close to the next threshold, where he'd lose partial control of the shadow. Sitting down in a soft chair, Damon stared into the darkness of his room. His voice was low, edged with unease. I can't sleep. What if my shadow goes berserk while I'm unconscious and kills me instead? The shadow reacted immediately, clutching its chest as if scandalized, its form rippling with an almost offended energy. Damon rolled his eyes, dismissing the theatrics. I don't have time for this, he muttered, pulling out his pager and setting a timer. He kept the system panel open, its glowing interface a constant reminder of his precarious state. I need to know how long it takes for the percentage to change, he said, jotting down notes. If I can figure out the timing, I'll know how long I have. Despite the weight of exhaustion, Damon forced himself to move to his study, where a stack of books from the library waited for him. He pulled one open and flipped to the first page. I'll use this time to read, he decided, while observing my shadow and documenting any changes to my body. The pager will help me track everything. Lost in his research, Damon noticed the absence of light in the room. The darkness didn't matter. He could see perfectly, even without illumination. That was the first change he documented. But hunger gnawed at him, pulling his focus away. His concentration faltered, and his eyes felt heavier with each passing second. Eventually, his head dipped lower, resting on the table. Fatigue overtook him, and he fell asleep. The darkness gave way to the light of the morning sun, creeping through the edges of the drawn curtains. The rays grew stronger as the sun climbed higher, painting the room in golden hues. Yet Damon did not stir, his face buried in the crook of his arm. A sharp knock broke the silence. When no response came, the door creaked open, the measured clicks of heels echoing against the hardwood floor. His name was called out again, but he gave no response. Damon Grey. The stern voice of the headmaid pierced through the haze of sleep. A firm hand shook his shoulder, jostling him awake. Damon Grey, wake up, her stern voice called. Damon Grey, wake up now. Sleeping this late when you have a class is unbecoming of a student. Groggy, Damon blinked his eyes open, struggling to focus. The figure of the headmaid stood over him, her sharp features outlined in the dim light filtering into the room. As Damon's vision adjusted, a wave of horror surged through him. The world around him had shifted, colors died into shadows, and every detail was unnaturally vivid, as though he could perceive the faintest movements in the air itself. Damon stammered, his voice trembling. The headmaid frowned, her gaze piercing. Are you quite all right, Damon? Damon gripped the edge of the table, his breath hitching. What is happening to me? Damon stared at the headmaid, his widened eyes betraying the fear and confusion clawing at his mind. But it wasn't fear of her. It was the visceral, gut-wrenching shock of a world stripped of color. The room, the sunlight, even the headmaid herself, all of it had faded into stark black and white. The only exception was the headmaid's chest, where a vibrant, golden glow pulsed faintly, alien in this monochrome existence. His hands trembled as he took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The headmaid remained unaffected by the change, her stern demeanor unchanged. She was a tall, composed woman with long black hair braided neatly down her back and sharp amber eyes that always seemed to pierce through him. Her uniform was pristine, marked by a brooch displaying the Academy's crest. A small detail Damon would never have noticed before, but now he could see it with startling clarity. "Damon Grey, are you all right?" Matilda's voice was firm, though her eyes narrowed as she caught Damon staring. The golden glow captivated him, drawing his gaze with an almost magnetic pull. His mouth hung open, and to his horror, he felt the unmistakable wetness of drool trailing from his lips. Yes, Miss Matilda. I'm fine," he muttered, forcing himself to tear his eyes away from her chest. The room's monochrome state remained overwhelming. The sunlight streaming through the windows lacked its usual warmth, appearing cold and colorless. Yet somehow, Damon still knew the original colors of everything. The polished mahogany of his desk, the navy curtains swaying lightly by the window. His vision was unervingly sharp. Even the dew droplets on the window frame, reflecting faintly distorted images of the outside world, were startlingly clear. "What is happening to me?" he thought, his mind racing. A quick glance at the system panel, still floating in front of him, made his stomach drop. His shadow hunger had climbed to dangerous levels. Matilda's voice broke through his daze, irritation evident. "Damon Grey, stop staring into the distance and get up. You have 15 minutes to get ready. After that, you'll have 5 minutes to eat before heading out. That gives you a total of 20 minutes. Now move." Her sharp tone jolted him. "Why, yes. I'll be ready," he stammered, scrambling to his feet and bolting toward the bathroom. Matilda, frowning slightly, glanced around his room, noting its spotless condition, a testament to the maid's efficiency. She turned to leave, but paused just before closing the door, her brows furrowed. Did the color of his eyes change? I'm certain he had blue eyes before. The thought lingered as she walked away, her memory of Damon's peculiar black eyes gnawing at the edges of her mind. In the bathroom, Damon slammed the door shut, his breaths coming in short, shaky bursts. His gaze flicked toward his shadow on the wall. At first, it seemed normal, mimicking his movements as it always did. But then it glitched. It wasn't his imagination. The shadow flickered erratically, its edges warping and distorting. One moment it was there. The next, it seemed to blink out of existence for a fraction of a second before returning, weaker than before. Its usual playful gestures were absent, replaced by a feeble stillness that was deeply unsettling. Damon's breath caught in his throat. He called up the system panel, dread pooling in his stomach. Shadow hunger levels, 80%. Condition, shadow is starved. A deep, hollow ache flared in his stomach as if on cue. His body felt heavy, the heat of hunger radiating from the pit of his being. He shook his head weakly, trying to push the feeling aside. "Get it together," he muttered to himself. He quickly washed up, the cold water doing little to refresh him. Once done, he dressed in his clean academy uniform, carefully pinning the brooch given to him by Professor Cale Blackthorn to his chest. Before stepping out, Damon glanced at himself in the mirror. His black eyes stared back, void of their former blue hue, heavy dark circles under his eyes. With a sigh, he adjusted his uniform, ensuring it fit neatly and avoided drawing unnecessary attention to his appearance. "I need to avoid crowded areas," he thought grimly as he exited the bathroom and headed downstairs, his mind already racing with the complications of his new reality. Damon stepped into the elevator, his fingers trembling slightly as he pressed the button for the ground floor. The soft hum of the machinery did little to calm the storm brewing within him. As the door slid open, he strode forward, intent on leaving the building, when a maid called out to him. Her voice, polite yet firm, pulled him from his thoughts. Reluctantly, he followed her down the hall toward the dining room. As they walked, Damon couldn't ignore the faint golden glow radiating from her chest. It was the same as what he had seen in the head maid, a warm, ethereal light that stirred something primal within him. His mouth watered involuntarily, and the faintest scent of something delectable wafted through his senses. The hunger clawed at him. For a brief moment, an uncontrollable urge to attack flared in his mind, a dark whisper urging him forward. No! He shook his head sharply, forcing himself back to reality. The maid led him to a small table where a modest breakfast had been arranged. She lowered her head respectfully before speaking. "You did not eat breakfast yesterday." The headmaid insists you do so today. Her tone softened slightly. She also said she is willing to forgive your absence from the dorms the night before. Damon blinked, momentarily distracted. He could hear her heartbeat, the rhythmic pulse of her blood coursing through her veins. The golden glow of her soul captivated him, but he forced his gaze downward, unwilling to let her see the hunger in his eyes. The maid stepped back after delivering her message, bowing slightly before leaving the room. Her absence gave him the clarity to process her words. How did she know? He wondered, his brows furrowing in confusion. As the head maid, it was Matilda's duty to oversee all the students in the war halls, even someone like him. But Damon couldn't shake the question of why she cared so much about his actions. His stomach growled, interrupting his thoughts. With a fatigued expression, he wolfed down the food in front of him. It was gone in moments, consumed with such ferocity that it startled even him. Yet the hollow ache in his gut remained. No matter how much he ate, it wouldn't make a difference. This insatiable hunger wasn't physical. It stemmed from something far darker. His eyes flicked to the faint golden light he could see emanating from others' chests. Each glow whispered of sustenance, and he couldn't deny the truth any longer. I know what my shadow wants, he thought grimly, and it's not good. Pushing the empty plate aside, Damon stood abruptly. Dark circles hung under his eyes, and his once sharp, gloomy gaze was dulled by fatigue. Without a word, he left the dining room and exited the dormitory, the brisk morning air greeting him as he stepped outside. As he reached the academy's main plaza, a sudden jolt of awareness hit him like a lightning strike. His breath caught in his throat, his senses sharpening in an instant as the world around him seemed to ripple. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and the shadow inside him stirred with a chilling anticipation. Damon stood frozen in place as students moved past him, their chatter blending into a dull hum. His breath hitched, and his pupils dilated, the black of his eyes expanding unnaturally as if they sought to consume all light. A long trail of drool leaked from his parted lips, unnoticed as his gaze locked onto the crowd. In his monochromatic world, the vibrant glow of their souls was unbearable, radiant, tantalizing, and beckoning him to devour them. Beneath his feet, his shadow began to writhe unnaturally, tendrils of darkness curling and coiling like smoke, inching toward the ground around him. It reacted violently, a predator denied its prey, its erratic movements mirroring Damon's own inner turmoil. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his hand reaching out toward a nearby student. The glow radiating from their chest was irresistible, pulling him forward like a moth to a flame. His eyes darkened further, and a predatory glint appeared in his gaze. Inches from touching the student, Damon froze. A surge of clarity hit him like a splash of cold water. Ah! He collapsed to his knees, clutching his stomach as if trying to contain the ravenous hunger clawing at his insides. A few passing students stopped, glancing at him with concerned expressions. The weight of their stares was enough to jolt him into action. He forced himself to his feet and bolted, his steps unsteady as he fled the plaza. Behind a detached building, Damon finally stopped, leaning heavily against the wall as he caught his breath. His chest heaved, his heart pounding in his ears. His shadow, normally mischievous and animated, had changed. It twitched erratically, its movements weak yet feral, as though gathering its strength for a desperate attack. Damon collapsed onto the ground, his legs giving out beneath him. He raised his head weakly, his body trembling with a mix of fear and exhaustion. Despite the terror gnawing at his mind, his thoughts felt unervingly calm and cold. I know what it wants, he realized, his gut twisting in revulsion. His shadow wasn't satisfied with scraps or ordinary sustenance. It craved souls, vital, powerful souls from beings like humans, elves, beastkin, and other races with potent life forces. Ark! A guttural groan escaped his lips as a wave of hunger-induced pain racked his body. Time blurred as he sat there, clutching his sides, his breath shallow and uneven. Occasionally, his vision would black out, plunging him into brief moments of unconsciousness. He glanced at his pager, using it to record the durations of his blackouts. It wasn't much, but it gave him some semblance of control over his spiraling state. His enhanced senses only made things worse. Through his shadow, he could perceive the movement of people and objects by the way they disrupted the light and darkness around them. The constant influx of sensory data was overwhelming, and each time he lost focus, it felt as though his consciousness expanded to encompass all the shadows around him. It was disorienting, painful, maddening. Hours passed, and by the time he emerged from his stupor, it was already lunchtime. He hadn't attended a single class, but the chatter of students and the unmistakable mention of lunch and cafeteria reached his ears, pulled in by his heightened hearing. Food! Food! The word slipped from his lips in a low, groggy mutter. He staggered to his feet, his movements sluggish and jerky like a reanimated corpse. He joined the flow of students heading to the cafeteria, blending into the crowd as best he could. His head hung low, his mind clouded by hunger so intense it bordered on madness. Hungry foot, he muttered under his breath, his voice hoarse and strained. The sun bore down on him as he walked, every sensation heightened to an unbearable degree. The warmth of the light, the sound of footsteps, the faint rustle of leaves, it all pressed against his senses like an unrelenting tide. Yet none of it mattered. His mind was consumed by one thought, one driving need: hunger. In this bizarre state, Damon arrived at the cafeteria, a lavish and bustling space packed with students, each seated at their respective tables. The Academy cafeteria was distinctly segregated. On the first floor, long communal tables were designated for commoners and underprivileged students. The second floor featured more exclusive round tables, reserved for the wealthy and middle-level nobility. But the pinnacle of luxury lay on the third floor, an area enclosed by transparent glass walls. This elite section required scanning one's pager to access. From outside, students could see the opulence within, a deliberate display of privilege reserved for upper nobility and elite students. Entry here required either status, an abundance of academy privileges, or both. Damon, however, had neither status nor favor among the elite. Yet he still ate there, every day, defiantly claiming his place among the nobles. His justification? A golden ticket, an academy privilege that granted him access to this hallowed ground. This boldness earned him scorn and bullying from the upper class, but Damon didn't care. Even in his current hunger-driven haze, his stubbornness endured. Without hesitation, he approached the glass doors, a small, bitter smirk tugging at his lips as the thought of smug nobles flitted through his mind. A hungry man was also an angry man, and Damon was both. Pulling out his pager, he swiped it against the sensor, the doors opening with a mechanical hum. He stepped through, ignoring the disdainful stares that burned into his back. Ordinarily, he would head to the counter and serve himself, but today, he lacked the energy. His legs felt like lead, his mind fogged by starvation. Collapsing into a chair, Damon reached under the table and pressed a small button, summoning a maid. The woman approached promptly, her steps hesitant as she noticed his trembling form. He didn't even look up at her, keeping his head low as his body quaked under the strain of his hunger. Food, he growled, his voice low and feral. The maid bowed quickly, a flicker of fear crossing her face at the raw, primal edge in his tone. What would you like to eat? She asked cautiously. Food. Now. Yes, right away. She hurried off, returning moments later with a service trolley laden with dishes. Damon didn't wait for her to finish setting the plates. As soon as they hit the table, he began devouring the food, shoveling it into his mouth with wild abandon. More, he demanded between bites. More. The maid yelped, nodding frantically. Yes, right away. She rushed back and forth, bringing more and more food to Damon's table. But no matter how much she provided, it was never enough. Damon ate like a ravenous beast, his table manners non-existent, food spilling onto the table and floor. His frenzied behavior quickly drew the attention of the other students, most of whom were nobles. What a beast! Who let such a savage creature in here? Disgusting. The murmurs grew louder, but Damon ignored them. He didn't care what they thought. As long as they didn't touch him, he would let it go. From her table, Leona Veilfire watched with sparkling eyes. The beastkin had a substantial pile of food before her, but her interest was wholly focused on Damon. The more Damon ate, the more despair filled him. No matter how much he consumed, the gnawing hunger remained, a void that nothing could fill. Frustration built within him, bubbling over into raw rage. With a guttural grunt, Damon suddenly stood and, with a surge of monstrous strength, hurled the table several meters across the room. It crashed into the counter, shattering glass and scattering food everywhere. The cafeteria fell silent, the other students staring in shock at the display of raw power. Damon's eyes glowed with a mad frenzy as he glared at the room, his breathing ragged. Every person in his line of sight appeared as prey, glowing with an unbearable light. Food, food, there's food everywhere. He swallowed hard, fighting the primal urge threatening to overtake him. Forcing himself to turn away, he bolted from the cafeteria, running blindly through the academy until he reached a deserted hallway. He staggered to a stop, leaning heavily against the wall. Hungry, so hungry, he muttered, his voice barely audible. As he stumbled forward, his shoulder collided with someone. Get the hell out of my way, he snapped, shoving the person with enough force to send them crashing into the wall. When Damon looked up, his eyes widened. Standing before him was a blinding source of light, brighter than any soul he had ever seen. His stomach twisted painfully, his mind clouding. He had no control now. The hunger consumed him entirely, and he lunged forward, his instincts fully taking over. Evangeline Brightwater froze in her tracks, the radiant light around her intensifying with an almost blinding fury. Her piercing gaze locked onto him, a mixture of anger and indignation flickering across her elegant features. How dare you? Evangeline had missed her usual trip to the cafeteria. She had been summoned by Professor Cale Blackthorne and had just finished her errand, now walking briskly through the halls with a stack of papers in her hands. Her attention was focused on the documents, her sharp mind processing the professor's instructions. As she turned a corner, she felt herself collide with someone. The impact caught her off guard, and before she could react, she was shoved forcefully into the wall. Ah! She gasped, the sting of the cold stone shooting up her back. The suddenness of it all left her shocked and furious. No one had ever treated her with such blatant disrespect. She pushed herself off the wall, anger blazing in her emerald eyes, and turned to confront the offender. Where her gaze locked on his face, recognition flickered in her mind. She didn't know his name, but she remembered him. He was the boy who had effortlessly evaded stray shots during her battle with Sylvia Moonvale. There had been something strange about him then, something elusive. But now, as she looked at him, she felt a chill crawl down her spine. His eyes were pitch black, his lips twisted into a snarl, and the way he stared at her was anything but human. His gaze was feral, cold, and unervingly predatory. Almost on instinct, she straightened, her voice laced with indignation. How dare you? Before her words had fully left her lips, he lunged forward. The movement was so sudden that Evangeline's mind blanked for a second. Her body tensed to defend itself. But just before he reached her, he stopped. He froze in place, trembling violently, his hand clutching his head. Sorry, Damon whispered hoarsely, his voice a faint rasp. He didn't even look at her, his face contorted with pain and frustration. Evangeline blinked in confusion, her anger momentarily replaced by unease. She studied him, noting the way his shadow seemed to writhe unnaturally beneath his feet, dark tendrils rising and sinking back into the ground as if alive. To her shock, he began to back away, his movements rigid and strained. He was trying to leave. Her anger flared once more. He shoved me and thinks he can just walk away without an explanation? Wait, she snapped, stepping forward and grabbing his shoulder to stop him. That was the moment everything unraveled. The instant her hand made contact, Damon stiffened. The sensation brought forth a flood of memories, times he'd been mocked, beaten, and humiliated by Marcus and his gang. A spark of rage ignited within him, consuming his fragile restraint like oil poured onto an open flame. His body trembled violently, and his eyes darkened further as shadows began to rise around him, swirling chaotically. Evangeline's hand slipped from his shoulder as Damon let out a low, guttural growl. Before she could react, he turned on her, grabbing her arm with terrifying strength. Without hesitation, he pulled her into a throw. Evangeline felt the air rush around her as her body was launched through the corridor. Reacting instinctively, she twisted midair and landed on her feet, her boots skidding slightly against the floor. The paper she had been carrying scattered around her like fallen leaves, forgotten as her narrowed gaze locked onto Damon. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice sharp but steady. Damon didn't respond. His body trembled violently, his breaths ragged and shallow. The shadows around him grew thicker, coiling upwards like snakes, their tips almost brushing his feet. Evangeline's eyes narrowed further as she assumed a defensive stance. Whatever was happening to him, it wasn't normal. She clenched her fists, magic sparking faintly at her fingertips. If he attacked again, she would be ready. Evangeline had already passed the point of patience. Any thought of a peaceful resolution vanished as her golden, sun-marked eyes narrowed with cold determination. She extended her hand forward, her voice steady yet filled with anger. Beams of light erupted from her palm, shooting faster than a human could ever hope to react. The attack should have ended things immediately, but Damon's shadow-infused instincts granted him an unnatural edge. The dark tendrils entwining his feet reacted to the energy shift, enabling his body to move with almost inhuman precision. Damon weaved through the beams effortlessly, his movements fluid and calculated. Evangeline's eyes widened slightly, momentarily betraying her surprise. He dodged. She thought, her mind racing. Most opponents would have attempted to block the attack using their magical attributes, but Damon had evaded it, a feat that required extraordinary speed and reflexes, especially against light magic. Her expression hardened, and she muttered under her breath, her voice steady but carrying an edge of disbelief. "So, he's faster than I thought." Small orbs of light began forming around her as she prepared her next move. Light magic, brilliant sparks. The orbs shot forward in rapid succession, a blinding barrage of light aimed directly at Damon. Each projectile streaked through the air like an artillery shell, their glow scorching the walls and floor upon impact. Damon's feral snarl deepened. His shadow expanded, tendrils fusing into his body, granting him an animalistic grace. He twisted his frame unnaturally, dodging the projectiles with a bone-chilling ease. His movements were fluid yet erratic, like a beast unbound by the limits of human anatomy. He darted between the walls, ceiling, and floor, his agility surpassing anything Evangeline had seen. Her gaze sharpened further as she adjusted her attacks mid-cast, altering the trajectories to box him in. "Let's see how long you can keep this up," she muttered, her voice filled with cold determination. "He's fast," she thought, her frustration mounting. Not as fast as Leona Veilfire, but his agility outclasses even her. "This isn't normal." Damon growled again, his eyes locked onto her. He moved seamlessly from 2 legs to 4, his shadow morphing his body further. The floor beneath him cracked as he launched himself forward, dodging the relentless barrage and closing the gap between them. Evangeline realized the distance was shrinking too quickly. Gritting her teeth, she molded her light magic into a glowing blade. Light magic, radiant blade. The blade shimmered with power as she swung it down in a wide arc, sending a streak of destruction across the ground. Damon, however, slipped past the strike with unnerving ease, his shadow-enhanced reflexes allowing him to evade even this close-range attack. She swung again, but this time he deflected her sword with a calculated strike of his hand, pushing the blade to the side. Evangeline didn't hesitate. unleashing a concentrated beam of light magic directly at him. Damon ducked and then sprang forward, his foot slamming into her with a flying kick. She crossed her arms in time to block the blow, though the impact sent her skidding back several feet. Her heart raced as she regained her footing, gripping her radiant blade tightly. Damon showed no signs of stopping. He charged forward, his movements unpredictable. Evangeline swung her sword with practiced precision, but each strike was either dodged or countered. He's reading my moves? No, it's more than that. He's anticipating them, she realized, frustration creeping into her thoughts. Damon's attacks were wild, yet strangely calculated, blending primal instincts with unnatural flexibility. His punches and kicks came from impossible angles, twisting his body as though he had no bones. Evangeline feinted to the left, hoping to catch him off guard, but he saw through it. His foot connected with her temple in a precise kick, and before she could recover, his palm struck her diaphragm, forcing the air from her lungs. She stumbled back, gasping for breath, her vision blurring for a split second. The next thing she registered was Damon launching another flying kick. This time, it hit with full force, and darkness claimed her vision as her body crumpled to the ground. Damon stood over her, his breathing heavy and erratic. Drool dripped from his mouth as his shadow writhed uncontrollably. His eyes were glazed, his consciousness buried beneath the primal hunger consuming him. He moved closer, his hand reaching for her neck. The temptation to crush the light she radiated was overwhelming, almost instinctual. But just as his fingers brushed her skin, his body jolted violently. Damon gasped, clutching his head as clarity returned in a crashing wave. His knees buckled, and he stumbled back, trembling uncontrollably. No, he muttered, his voice hoarse and filled with panic. He turned abruptly and bolted down the corridor, his footsteps echoing as he fled. He stumbled several times, but forced himself onward, fear overtaking his every thought. He didn't stop running until he reached the busy plaza, his head low as he darted toward the forest. Unbeknownst to Damon, a figure watched him from the windows of an adjacent building. Lark Bonaire's lips curved into a sinister smile as his eyes followed Damon's retreating form. "Found you, Grey," he murmured, his voice dripping with malice. With a casual flick of his wrist, he opened the window beside him and leapt out, using wind magic to steady his descent. His movements were precise, calculated. He slipped between buildings and trees, evading the gaze of wandering students as he pursued Damon into the forest. Damon's breathing was ragged as he sprinted through the outskirts of the academy, his thoughts a chaotic blur. His body moved on instinct, his legs carrying him toward the familiar refuge of the forest, a place he often used as his training ground. The path to his destination quickly disappeared under his feet as he veered off course, the dense canopy of trees swallowing him whole. The sunlight filtering through the leaves created a patchwork of light and shadow on the forest floor, a sight that might have been serene under any other circumstances. But to Damon, it was a tormenting labyrinth. His black and white vision, heightened by a shadow affinity, overwhelmed him with sensory input. The shadows from the trees were alive, pulsating with strange energy, bombarding him with fragmented images and sensations. The sheer volume of information crashed over him like a tidal wave. He stumbled, his knees hitting the ground with a dull thud. A pained grunt escaped his lips as his world spun uncontrollably. His hands trembled as he tried to push himself upright, only to collapse again after a single faltering step. Crawling to the nearest tree, he slumped against its rough bark, his chest heaving. "Stop! Please make it stop!" His voice was barely a whisper, a desperate plea to the shadow that had once been his ally. But the shadow offered no solace. Where it had once been a loyal extension of his will, it now writhed on the ground like a living thing, its erratic movements reflecting the chaos in Damon's mind. He clutched his head tightly, his fingers digging into his scalp as he tried to block out the flood of perceptions. The shadows around him whispered, their voices indistinct but maddeningly persistent. Each inanimate shadow seemed to carry its own distinct presence, a cacophony of stimuli that drowned out his thoughts. Why won't it stop? Damon's anguish deepened, his body trembling as he fought against the overwhelming sensations. Then, amidst the chaos, a sound reached him, faint but distinct. Footsteps. The steady rhythm of someone approaching echoed in his heightened perception. Though still distant, his shadow-filled vision painted a vivid image of the intruder. Lark Bonaire, running confidently through the forest. Lark's soul radiated a faint glow that caught Damon's attention, a beacon amidst the shadows. Damon's throat tightened, his hunger surging uncontrollably at the sight of that light. His teeth clenched as he fought the urge, his hands gripping his head even tighter. "No, no, not again," he whispered, his voice trembling with dread. The footsteps grew louder, each step reverberating in Damon's distorted senses. It wasn't long before Lark emerged from the trees, his gaze locking onto Damon's collapsed form. Damon sat slumped against the tree, his body shuddering as he muttered incoherent pleas. His once sharp eyes were now clouded with confusion and fear, his shadow twitching erratically at his feet. Lark's lips curled into a slow, calculated smile as he observed the scene. "There you are, Grey. I've been looking for you since yesterday." Lark Bonaire's voice rang out, sharp and mocking. He strode toward Damon confidently, summoning a whip formed of wind magic with a casual flick of his hand. "You didn't really think you could kick me and just run away, did you?" Lark sneered. "You're so lucky Lord Xander stopped me back then." "Ha ha ha." Damon sat slumped against the tree, his head lowered and hands clutching his temples. Shadows flickered erratically around him, twitching like living things. His voice was weak, almost a whisper. "You should run. I won't be able to stop it if it reaches 90%. Lark paused, narrowing his eyes at Damon's muttering. To him, it sounded like defiance, as if Damon were issuing a challenge even in his weakened state. "For someone as weak as you, Grey, you sure have a big mouth," Lark said, stepping closer. "After I'm done with you today, you'll never raise your head to your betters again." Damon raised his head slightly, his expression hollow. His eyes darted briefly to the side where a glowing system panel flickered in his vision. Shadow, hunger levels, 89%. The warning burned into his mind, yet his voice came out soft and desperate. "Run away, just go. It's hungry." Lark's expression turned colder, his irritation mounting. "Still mouthing off, huh? Today, no one will save you from me." He raised his leg and kicked Damon in the side, sending him sprawling onto the forest floor. Damon landed in a heap, dry leaves sticking to his clothes. He didn't even try to dodge, lying still where he fell. Lark's lips curled into a cruel grin. "Oh, now you're pathetic. Let's make this lesson stick." He followed up with another kick, this one driving into Damon's stomach. The force made Damon cough, but he remained limp, his body barely reacting. "You dare to kick me in the groin, Lark Bonaire?" Lark spat, his voice rising with rage. "After I threw you into that ravine, you should have stayed dead. But no, you came back, insulted me in front of Lord Xander. And now you think you're someone? You deserve to die." With a sadistic laugh, he raised his whip and brought it down on Damon's back. The wind magic sliced through Damon's shirt, leaving thin lines of blood on his skin. Damon's eyes grew colder, his body trembling, not from the pain of Lark's strikes, but from the overwhelming flood of sensory information assaulting him. His head pounded as shadows whispered incoherently around him, drowning out everything else. His voice was barely audible as he muttered, "I'm so tired. I'm so hungry." And then it happened. Ding. The sound echoed in Damon's mind, cutting through the chaos. Shadow hunger levels, 90%. Shadow has become ravenous. All stats are drastically amplified. A sudden surge of power coursed through him, and his shadow twisted violently, wrapping around his body like a living entity. Damon's form disappeared as the shadow consumed him entirely, reshaping his body into a monstrous figure. His hands elongated into razor-sharp claws, his mouth filled with jagged teeth, and his eyes vanished, replaced by the void of pure darkness. He stood, a hulking shadowy creature radiating an aura of malevolent hunger. The transformation was instantaneous. Lark took a step back, his bravado melting into wide-eyed terror as he stared at the abomination before him. Grey, what's happening? He stammered, his voice trembling. The shadow creature tilted its head, emitting a low, guttural growl that resonated through the forest. Its movements were erratic yet deliberate, exuding raw, predatory power. Driven by instinct, Lark lashed out with his wind magic, sending a slicing gust toward the creature. But the attack dissipated against its form, utterly ineffective. The shadow struck back, its clawed hand darting out and grabbing Lark's arm. With a sickening crunch, it crushed the bones in his wrist. Ark! Lark's scream echoed through the forest as he crumpled in pain, his right arm hanging mangled at his side. The shadow released him, letting his body drop, but its dark form trembled with sadistic laughter at his agony. Lark, realizing his attacks were futile, scrambled to flee, activating wind magic to propel himself away. But the shadow was faster. With an inhuman speed, it darted between the trees and appeared above him. A clawed hand slammed Lark's face into the ground, dragging him across the forest floor. His face scraped against rocks and roots, leaving him bloodied and broken. He tried to scream, but the shadow pressed him down, cutting off his voice. Then, with terrifying strength, it lifted him and hurled him into a tree. The force splintered the trunk, leaving Lark gasping in a pool of his own blood. "Why, you monster!" Lark croaked, trying to crawl away. "I'll report this to the Inquisition. I swear on the Bonaire name." The shadow stepped closer, its claws carving through nearby trees as it advanced. "I am hungry," it whispered, the voice guttural and alien. Lark froze, his bravado evaporating into pure terror. "Grey, please, don't do this," he begged, his voice cracking. "I'm a noble. I'll pay you millions of zenny. Spare me. I swear I'll never bother you again." The shadow didn't respond. Its void-like maw opened wide, jagged teeth glinting before it clamped down on him. Lark's screams were cut off as the shadow devoured him whole, leaving no trace behind. For a moment, the forest was silent. Then the shadows receded, melting away from Damon's form. He collapsed to his knees, trembling as he regained control of his body. "You have slain Lark Bonaire. You have received 5 attribute points. You have acquired the skill 5x. Your shadow is full." Damon's breath caught in his throat as the notifications faded. Tears streamed down his face, and his voice cracked with anguish. The forest was eerily silent, the stillness pressing on Damon like a weight. His breaths came in shallow gasps as he glanced around, willing himself to calm down. The situation was dire. If he were implicated in the death of Lark Bonaire, his life at the Academy, and possibly beyond, would be over. The Academy prided itself on being neutral ground, where students enjoyed a degree of diplomatic immunity. Its own rules superseded external laws. But Lark wasn't just any student. He was a noble. A simple fight would have been excused, but this was different. Damon hadn't just killed him. He had consumed him in an act that would be deemed both inhumane and monstrous. The very thought sent a shiver down his spine. Tears that had spilled moments ago dried instantly as cold reality settled in. The Temple Inquisition. The rumors Damon had heard about their methods made his stomach churn. "If I get caught, it's all over," he whispered to himself, biting down on his lip until the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. His mind raced, consumed by fear and the desperate need to cover his tracks. The guilt of killing Lark was shoved aside, replaced by a primal survival instinct. He began formulating a plan, forcing himself to think logically. The scene was littered with evidence: claw marks on the trees, bloodstains, a broken tree trunk, torn fabric, and Lark's pager lying on the ground. Damon took deep breaths, his hands trembling as he assessed everything. No mistakes, he reminded himself, knowing that any slip-up could spell doom. He decided against heading directly to the Academy. Instead, he moved toward the barrier at the edge of the forest, breaking a few branches along the way to simulate the chaotic retreat of a monster. He carefully placed strips of Lark's torn clothing on shrubs and hung the pager on a snapped branch. Each step was deliberate, leaving no trace of his involvement. Circling around, Damon crossed the barrier into the wilderness beyond. He made his way to a nearby river, its cool water sending a shiver through his body as he waded in, letting the current wash over him. No scent, no tracks, he thought, emerging soaked and chilled but resolute. Back within the safety of the Academy's barrier, Damon headed toward the secluded forest where he often trained. Here, he was meticulous, leaving no tracks or signs of his passage. Arriving at the clearing, he hung his Academy uniform on the weapons rack. The enchanted fabric, damaged by Lark's wind whip, was already mending itself, a testament to its craftsmanship from the magic continent of Arona. That, at least, was one less thing to worry about. But the gnawing anxiety wouldn't leave him. He didn't know how long it would take before someone noticed Lark's absence. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. Turning to a training dummy, he let out a guttural yell, punching it with all his might. Why? Why did this have to happen to me? His voice cracked with anguish. As sunlight filtered through the canopy, Damon's shadow stretched long on the ground. It twitched, shifting unnaturally. He froze, his breath catching as he noticed it scratch its head in what seemed like an apologetic gesture. "Go away," he shouted, his voice filled with raw emotion. The shadow flinched, retreating behind a training dummy. From its hiding spot, it peeked out cautiously, almost like a child afraid of scolding. Damon glared at it, his body trembling with a mixture of anger, fear, and helplessness. For now, the forest was silent once more, but Damon knew the reprieve wouldn't last. Damon collapsed onto his rear, his chest heaving as he fought to suppress the fear threatening to overwhelm him. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to think rationally. I didn't leave any traces. I should be fine. I just need to act dumb if anyone asks. Lark probably didn't tell anyone he was coming after me, or Marcus and his group would have been with him. No one else knew he was here but me. Despite his efforts to stay calm, the fear gnawed at him, creeping in every time he let his guard down. He couldn't risk returning to the Academy in broad daylight. Someone might spot him, and suspicion would follow. The scene he'd left behind pointed to a monster attack, but the nagging thought of being suspected kept him frozen. I need to distract myself, Damon muttered, but the thought of training felt impossible in his current state. Instead, he opted for the next best thing, checking his system panel. With a flicker of thought, the translucent screen appeared before him, displaying his stats. He scanned the familiar numbers, his heart steadying as his mind focused on something tangible. HP 50-50, Mana 30-30, Strength 9, Agility 12, Speed 25, Endurance 10, Class Shadow 100, Shadow Hunger Levels 0%, Shadow Level 1, Condition Shadow is full, Attributes Umbra, Skills 5x, Locked. His stats hadn't changed much, except for a few notable differences. His shadow energy had returned to full, resting at 100%, and the hunger level was now 0%. Damon grimaced, recalling the moment his shadow had devoured Larkbonair. His theory seemed correct. His shadow fed on intelligent creatures. He tapped on the Shadow Level tab, revealing a submenu. Shadow Level 1. Your shadow level reflects your control and power over your shadow. You can level up by feeding it and completing specific challenges or quests, which grant stat points to enhance HP, mana, and other attributes. Level up requirements. Souls consumed, 1/3. Damon stared coldly at the words. The requirement for leveling up was clear, souls. He had gained 1 from killing Larkbonair. His chest tightened, but before guilt could take hold, something else caught his attention. At the top of the screen, a small icon blinked, a number 5 with a plus sign. Damon focused on it, revealing another menu. Attribute points. Attribute points are gained by feeding the shadow or completing quests. These points can be distributed to empower any specific stat. Available points, 5. His eyes gleamed. So I can use this to increase any stat? He murmured. He thought for a moment, then decided. All points to mana. The instant he confirmed his choice, his mana stat shifted. Mana, 35 plus 5. A wave of warmth washed over him as the new mana coursed through his body. Damon gasped, feeling the energy surge. It actually worked. My mana really grew. I can feel it. For a fleeting moment, his fear and worries vanished, replaced by the euphoria of growth. Damon had spent years trying to grow stronger through training, but the results had always been incremental at best. Now he had gained power in an instant, and all I had to do was kill one person. He whispered, a smile creeping across his face. The rush of power eclipsed the moral weight of what he'd done. Lost in his exhilaration, he didn't notice his shadow until it returned to its place beneath his feet. It shifted unnaturally, its edges darkening, as if mirroring his smile. But as Damon continued to grin, the shadow seemed to frown, its form twisting with an almost worried expression. Damon's eyes flickered down, his smile faltering. Narrowing his gaze, he muttered, "The system isn't all good, but it rewards me for my actions." He paused. Speaking of rewards, I also got a skill. He focused on the Skills tab, and the moment the information materialized, his breath caught. His eyes widened in disbelief as he read the description, the words sending a shiver down his spine. The system panel revealed the Skill tab, and as Damon carefully read through the details, he felt an involuntary thrill rise within him. The description of his newly acquired skill exceeded his expectations. It was an active skill, to ensure he wasn't imagining things in a desperate bid to distract himself from reality. Damon forced himself to calm down and reread the skill description, his eyes scanning the words with precision. Skill, 5x. Description. The warriors of the Sky Continent, Voldrin, embodied freedom and limitless growth, their achievements inspiring the concept of boundless potential reflected in this skill. Effect. 5x amplifies a chosen stat by 5 times its base value for 5 minutes. Type. Active. Cooldown. 10 minutes. Damon couldn't help but feel impressed. The skill's potential was immense. He paused, considering the reference to Voldrin, the northeastern continent known for its flying cities, airships, and nomadic lifestyle. Their strong sense of independence and freedom was legendary, as was their worship of both the unknown god of the demons and the goddess of doom. This duality had once branded Voldrin as heretical, though the temple had rescinded its judgment centuries ago. Parts of Voldrin have supposedly been taken over by demons recently. Damon mused. The truce between demons and the goddess's race made such rumors more intriguing than concerning, but he pushed the thought aside. What truly captivated him now was the skill's ability. 5x amplifies a chosen stat by 5 times its base value for 5 minutes. He glanced at his stats again, his attention drawn to his mana. It had always been a source of shame, far too low to perform adequately in class. Even after adding the 5 attribute points earlier, raising his mana to 35, it still felt insignificant. But now, with his skill, everything seemed different. 5x to mana, Damon muttered, eager to test the skill. A sudden surge rippled through his body as mana swelled within him, flooding his system like a rushing tide. The intensity far surpassed the warmth he'd felt earlier. Empowered, he smiled, momentarily free of his fears and doubts. HP 50-50, mana 175, 5x. Strength 9, agility 12, speed 25, endurance 10, class. Shadow 100, shadow hunger levels 0%, shadow level 1. Condition, shadow is full. Attributes, Umbra. Skills, 5x. Locked. His mana had soared to an impressive 175. For the first time, Damon had a tangible amount of energy to wield, an advantage he had never experienced before. The implications were not lost on him. The skill might not seem overwhelming now, but as his stats grew, multiplying any of them by 5 could make him an unstoppable force. If I keep increasing my mana, This skill alone could make me an enemy no one would dare to face. His excitement bubbled over. Deciding to test his newfound strength, Damon recalled what he'd been taught in elemental class. He focused on his shadow attribute, channeling the energy into his hand. Slowly, a ball of shadow magic formed, pulsing with raw potential. Damon's smile widened. His power, long dismissed as weak, finally had substance. Pointing his hand toward a nearby tree, he unleashed the shadow ball. It shot forward, dark energy crackling as it struck the tree. With a loud crack, the tree split, part of it collapsing under the force. Damon stared at the damage, his chest heaving with exhilaration. For the first time, he felt like he truly mattered in this world. A dangerous force in the making. This is only the beginning. Damon smiled, his chest rising with exhilaration. Ha, it worked. I did it, he exclaimed, fist clenched triumphantly. He looked down at his shadow, a grin still plastered across his face. Did you see that? I did it. My power isn't useless anymore. I did it. The shadow beneath him seemed to respond, clapping its hands in a soundless gesture of celebration. For a moment, the animosity he had felt toward his shadow dissolved in the thrill of his newfound strength. The guilt and anguish of killing Bonaire were momentarily forgotten, buried beneath his euphoria. Glancing at his mana, Damon frowned as realization struck. The single shadow ball he had unleashed had drained 50 mana points. No wonder I couldn't do this before. My normal mana pool could never handle it. That one attack cost more than my pitiful 30 mana could hold. He clenched his fist, determination flaring in his eyes. But now I can get stronger. I can earn attribute points and increase my power even further. With renewed vigor, Damon formed another shadow ball and then experimented with other techniques. However, his enthusiasm quickly drained his mana to 0, leaving him exhausted well before the 5-minute duration of his skill expired. Despite the fatigue, he couldn't sit still, his excitement undiminished. Damon eagerly awaited the cooldown period to end so he could explore the skill's potential in other stats. After 10 minutes passed, Damon rose and approached a nearby training dummy. He tried lifting it with one hand, but failed miserably. All right, let's see how this works with strength, he muttered. Activating the skill, 5x, he focused on his strength stat. Strength, 45 5x. A surge of raw power coursed through his body, his muscles responding with newfound vigor. Damon grabbed the dummy again, this time lifting it with little effort. The sheer strength amazed him. This is incredible, he whispered, a smile tugging at his lips as he tested his enhanced strength with various exercises. Once the cooldown reset again, Damon turned his attention to other stats. With every activation of 5x, his abilities soared to unimaginable levels. When he boosted his speed, the effect was astonishing, his movements blurring as he darted around the training ground. However, his endurance couldn't keep pace with his newfound velocity, and he exhausted himself well before the 5-minute timer expired. Finally, Damon turned to his most unique stat, shadow energy. Already at 100, the boost pushed it to an overwhelming 500. Yet, to his frustration, he felt no noticeable difference. Why? What does it mean? Why can't I feel anything? He wondered, but he shook his head. It doesn't matter for now. I'll figure it out later. By the time Damon finished his tests, the sun had set, and darkness blanketed the training ground. He returned to where his academy uniform hung, finding it dry and freshly mended. After slipping into the pristine clothing, he waited a little longer for the night to deepen. Then, he made his way back to the academy. Damon's steps felt lighter as he approached the war walls, though a subtle unease lingered. The intense hunger he had felt that morning was gone, his shadow satiated from its grisly feast on Bonaire. Yet, the memory of that act weighed on him, twisting his heart with unease no matter how hard he tried to suppress it. Sneaking into his room undetected, Damon sighed in relief. He shrugged off his academy jacket, ready to collapse into bed. But as he placed the jacket on his chair, he froze. His hand instinctively went to his chest. The brooch was gone. A chill ran down Damon's spine. If I left it at the scene of the crime, the thought was like ice in his veins. It would be glaring evidence. Damon stared out through the window, his thoughts a storm of uncertainty. He considered returning to the forest where he had killed Lark Bonner, but the idea quickly soured in his mind. If I go back, I'll just make more mistakes, leave more evidence. His brooch's absence gnawed at him, but it wasn't incriminating evidence by itself. There was no clear link between him and the gruesome death. Everything about Lark Bonner's demise pointed to a monster, a creature with claws and power far beyond Damon's own. As long as I stick to that story, I'm fine, he muttered under his breath. In fact, I just need to act like I know nothing at all. I never saw Lark Bonner or anyone else. In the world beyond these walls, nobles wouldn't need hard evidence to act against him. As a lowly commoner, they could have him arrested, tortured for answers, or worse, with only a shred of suspicion. But here, within the bounds of Aether Academy, things were different. The Academy was more than just a school. It was a fortress of neutrality. Damon clenched his fists, drawing some comfort from his unique status. As a student of Aether Academy, he was granted a form of diplomatic immunity. No noble, no matter how powerful, could touch him without the Academy's consent. This sanctuary extended to all students, regardless of their origins, because Aether Academy was a melting pot of cultures and nations, drawing youths from every corner of the world of Aetherus. The Academy was nestled within Soltheon, the war continent, specifically in the Empire of Valtherin. Its proximity to Valyrian, the imperial capital, lent it an air of prestige. Located on neutral ground, known as Aether's Sanctuary, Aether Academy stood as a beacon of unity amid a fractured world. Here, young warriors trained to combat the demonic scourge that plagued the land. Although the current ceasefire provided a fragile reprieve, the Academy's purpose was clear: to prepare its students for the endless war that could reignite at any moment. Damon exhaled deeply, the tension in his chest easing slightly. As long as he remained a student, his status as a commoner mattered little within the Academy's meritocratic system, at least on the surface. He knew segregation lingered in subtler forms. Nobles still found ways to exert their influence, but Aether Academy offered a rare opportunity where talent could overshadow bloodline. Although segregation still exists, he thought grimly, graduating from Aether Academy wasn't just an achievement, it was a gateway to greatness. For commoners and nobles alike, graduating meant access to unparalleled opportunities. Positions of power, influence, and unimaginable wealth awaited those who completed their training. Even the Empire's elites aspired to graduate, and the Academy welcomed all who showed the talent and resolve to survive its rigorous trials. It was a brutal proving ground where not everyone made it to the end. Students often died during their training, but those who endured left their mark on the world, their names etched into history. Damon's resolve hardened as he thought about what graduation would mean for him. The scholarship funds the Academy provided were a lifeline, but it was more than just money keeping him here. If I make it to graduation, every door of opportunity will open for me. I just have to survive. For Damon, survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about playing the game, making the right moves, and ensuring that his past stayed buried, along with Lark Bonner. Damon clenched his fists, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and defiance. The Academy wouldn't want Lark's death to become public knowledge. Not yet. It would compromise their independence, their image. He spoke aloud to steady his thoughts, which means they won't make it public right away. Even if the Academy decided to address the matter, they would spin it into a narrative that wouldn't tarnish their reputation. Damon's mind raced, analyzing every possible angle. Lark's powerful family, the temple's potential involvement, the political ramifications. He lacked crucial information, and it gnawed at him. He gritted his teeth, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. For now, I just need to lay low. No need to change my routine. Damon made up his mind. He'd feign ignorance if the matter of his brooch came up, brushing it off as an innocent loss. He took a deep breath, attempting to steady the turmoil within him. I don't regret it, he thought fiercely. Lark Bonnaire deserved what he got. He oppressed me, mocked me, treated me like I was less than dirt. His teeth clenched so tightly that he tasted blood. This is justice, he muttered, his voice trembling with both conviction and doubt. I only destroyed my oppressor. He raised his head, steeling himself. My shadow will need more if I'm going to survive. I need power, and I can't get it through normal means. The thought of Luna crossed his mind, her image rekindling his resolve. Even if not for myself, I have to do this for her. He walked to the window, staring into the darkness. I must stay ahead of them at all times, he whispered. The brooch's disappearance still loomed over him, but his fear was slowly being replaced by an icy resolve. He would do whatever it took to survive in this merciless world. His thoughts shifted to the upcoming mid-semester evaluation, a trial that loomed like an executioner's blade. If I don't make the top 10, I'll be expelled. That bastard Professor Cale Blackthorn will make sure of it. Damon's fist tightened. I can't let that happen. I need to figure out where my shadow's next meal will come from and find a long-term solution to feed it. I need to be ready. The clock was ticking, and Damon knew the Academy's investigation might uncover something eventually. Still, he had time he'd use wisely. I'll use this system and my shadow to the fullest, he vowed, glancing at the dark figure at his side. The shadow responded, nodding its head in silent applause before giving him a thumbs up. Damon's lips twisted into a grim smile. You're not exactly my ally, are you? But you're not my enemy, either. So help me. Help me become stronger. Help me seize my fate. Help me devour to gain strength. The shadow swirled around him in a silent, sinister affirmation. Damon stood silently in his dorm room, the suffocating fear replaced by cold, unyielding resolve. The night deepened, but Damon didn't rest. He sat at his desk, pulling out a stack of books and opening them in the dim light. His eyes scanned the pages hungrily. Knowledge is one of the keys to open the door of power, he murmured, his voice low and determined. With that, Damon began to read, immersing himself in the darkness of the night and the knowledge of the world, preparing himself for the trials ahead. Damon saw the first light of dawn creeping through his window, casting a pale, golden glow across his room. His face remained buried in the books he'd borrowed from the library, where he'd been reading tirelessly through the night. The darkness that had shrouded the room earlier was no hindrance to him now, thanks to his newfound vision that rendered light unnecessary. Even in the absence of illumination, he could clearly see every word on the pages, every corner of his room. As dawn brightened the space, Damon's gaze shifted toward his shadow. It had spent the night skidding across the room, flitting from corner to corner like a restless sentinel on patrol. He yawned, exhaustion setting in after a sleepless night. I can't afford to miss class again, he thought, rubbing his eyes. Missing yesterday had already put him on edge. Another absence might start drawing attention, and that was the last thing he needed. Still, the nagging worry crept in. His absence could implicate him, couldn't it? No, he muttered, shaking his head. I can't let myself second-guess everything. If I do, my heart will give out long before they catch me. He clung to the belief that there was no evidence tying him to Lark Bonnaire. There couldn't be. He had been too careful. Damon walked into the bathroom and washed up. The cold water splashing against his face helped chase away some of the lingering fatigue. Afterward, he dressed in his crisp, clean uniform, neatly folding and tossing his soiled clothes into the laundry basket. The maids would take care of it on laundry day, as always. As he stepped into the hallway, his eyes caught a flash of red hair. There, walking down the corridor, was a stunning girl with striking crimson locks that shimmered even in the dim morning light. Her posture and gait were regal, exuding confidence and authority. Damon didn't even need to see her face to know who she was. Lilith Astronova, the second-year student council president. What's she doing on this floor? He muttered under his breath. Second years had their own floor, far removed from his. There was no reason she should be here. But Damon shook his head, dismissing the thought. Not my problem. Except is she here to investigate? Narrowing his eyes, he turned in the opposite direction, took the elevator down, and headed for the dining hall. Breakfast was light, barely enough to stave off his hunger, but it didn't matter. He wasn't in the mood to eat anyway. Finishing quickly, Damon left for his first class of the day, potion brewing. When he arrived, only a handful of students were present. Perfect. Damon found a quiet corner where he could blend into the background, avoiding any unnecessary attention. As he sat, his ears perked up, hoping to catch whispers of rumors or clues about Lark Bonaire. Most of it was mundane chatter, the typical gossip that floated around the academy. But then a name caught his attention. Lark. Damon's eyes shifted toward a group of students. It was Xander Ravenscroft and his friends. Their voices were hushed, just out of earshot. "I can't hear them," Damon muttered, irritation creeping in. His unease grew. "I killed Lark Bonaire. What if they know?" His shadow, which had been idly shifting nearby, suddenly waved at him. Damon blinked, startled. "You want to listen in on them?" The shadow nodded, its form quivering in anticipation. Damon hesitated, biting his lip. It felt risky, but he couldn't let this opportunity slip by. "Fine," he whispered, "but don't get caught." The shadow saluted him before slithering under the desks, blending seamlessly with the natural shadows cast by the morning light. It moved unnoticed, positioning itself beneath Xander's group. Damon's heart raced, his palms clammy with anxiety. "Don't get caught. Don't get caught." The shadow merged flawlessly into the room's inanimate darkness, becoming nearly invisible. Damon forced himself to breathe steadily, trying to look nonchalant as the class filled up. Eventually, the professor arrived, and the shadow slipped back to Damon's side. Leaning closer to it, Damon whispered, "Well, do they know he's dead?" The shadow shook its head. Damon exhaled, relief washing over him. "So, they don't suspect me?" The shadow shook its head again, then gestured with a series of movements that Damon instinctively understood. "They noticed he didn't come back last night," Damon murmured, piecing the information together. "And they haven't seen him this morning either." The shadow continued to gesture. "They tried calling his pager, but he didn't pick up, so they reported his absence to the academy, just in case he got into trouble." Damon's chest tightened. "How thoughtful of them," he muttered bitterly. Then, narrowing his eyes, he added, "Let me guess, reporting on such short notice was Xander Ravenscroft's idea, wasn't it?" The shadow nodded. "I figured as much. That bastard, he's not stupid. No, it's more like he has excellent judgment." Damon's gaze locked on his Xander, a simmering resentment bubbling beneath his calm exterior. "He always causes problems for me, even without meaning to." His voice was laced with venom. "I hate him even more now." He sighed, slumping slightly in his chair. "How could I not hate someone who treats me like I'm less than the dirt beneath his feet?" The professor began the lecture, but Damon's mind remained elsewhere, his thoughts entangled in schemes and strategies for staying ahead of those who might stand in his way. The professor droned on, his monotone voice blending into the background as Damon half listened. He jotted down the important parts of the lecture, but his mind kept wandering, preoccupied with thoughts of Lark Bonaire. Lark was dead, and no matter how much Damon wanted to dismiss it, the weight of that reality bore down on him. The guilt and paranoia gnawed at him, making it hard to focus. Class eventually ended, followed by the next, and soon it was lunchtime. During lectures, Damon couldn't ignore the subtle glances cast his way by Evangeline Brightwater. The number one first year, her reputation was as pristine as her golden hair and sun-marked eyes. But her attention unsettled him. Damon hadn't even noticed at first. It was a shadow that informed him, giving him a nudge and pointing her out. Each time her gaze lingered, it added to his unease. "Why is she looking at me?" he wondered. The cafeteria was crowded as always, the hum of voices and clatter of trays filling the air. Damon, however, didn't need to worry about finding a seat. He headed straight to the more exclusive section reserved for nobles and top-ranking students. When he arrived, he spotted Xander Ravenscroft and his group occupying a table near the center. Their laughter and animated conversation grated on his nerves, but Damon didn't stop. He walked past them, his gaze fixed on the table at the farthest corner, secluded and quiet, just the way he preferred. Reaching the table, Damon sat down. It was only then that he realized he hadn't grabbed any food. But the thought of weaving through the bustling cafeteria unsettled him further. Instead, he pressed a button discreetly embedded into the table, summoning a maid. When she arrived, he ordered something light. As he waited, Damon could hear the murmurs of other nobles nearby, their whispers sharp and cutting. "Did you see what he did yesterday?" one whispered. "He's a beast," another scoffed. Damon ignored them, though their words rekindled the memory of yesterday's incident. His shadow had been hungry, ravenous, in fact, and he had lost control, acting in a way that was less than human. The aftermath had earned him disdainful looks and cruel remarks, but Damon refused to let their judgment affect him. His food arrived shortly after, and he started eating in silence, savoring the calm of his corner. But that peace didn't last long. The cafeteria gradually fell silent, the bustling noise replaced by an eerie stillness. Damon glanced up, his fork hovering midair, and found himself staring at Evangeline Brightwater. She stood directly in front of him, her flawless appearance almost glowing in the soft cafeteria light. Her expression was composed, but her eyes held a quiet intensity as she addressed him. "May I sit here?" she asked politely, her voice calm yet firm. Damon frowned, setting his fork down. He met her gaze, unflinching. "No, you may not." His tone was cold, leaving no room for negotiation. Evangeline Brightwater stepped into the bustling cafeteria, her presence commanding immediate attention. The vibrant hum of conversation began to quiet as her gaze swept across the room. She didn't falter, walking with the unshaken poise expected of someone of her stature. Her eyes sought out one table, at the far edge of the cafeteria, where a lone figure sat. Damon Grey. She had learned his name earlier after a brief inquiry. Something about him had caught her interest. As she made her way forward, the silence followed her like a wave. By the time she reached the center of the cafeteria, Xander Ravenscroft had noticed her approach. He turned to his group, gesturing for them to give him space. They complied without hesitation, leaving him standing at the now empty table. Xander stood to greet her, his confidence unwavering. "Lady Brightwater, would you like to have lunch with me?" he asked, a polite smile on his face. But Evangeline didn't even glance in his direction. She walked past him, her eyes locked on the table at the far corner. Damon's table. Xander blinked, stunned. The murmurs that rose among his group were quickly drowned out by the whispering of the other students. Evangeline stopped in front of Damon's table, her graceful presence a stark contrast to the dark-haired boy sitting alone. Damon didn't notice her at first, his focus on the food in front of him. He lazily stabbed a piece of food with his fork, only to pause and glance up. His black eyes met hers, and his expression hardened into a cold frown. Evangeline's gaze held steady, her intensity unwavering. "May I sit here?" she asked. Damon's tone was sharp, his response immediate. "No, you may not." Evangeline blinked, taken aback by his bluntness. In noble society, such a dismissal was unthinkably rude. Her hesitation lasted only a moment before she did something equally unexpected. Without a word, she took the seat opposite him. Damon's glare deepened. "By the goddess, what is wrong with this girl? Didn't I say no?" The cafeteria was abuzz now. Whispers filled the room as students gawked at the scene. Evangeline Brightwater, the #1 first year, sitting with Damon Grey, the one who barely scraped by in his classes. It was an unusual pairing that had everyone talking. "I don't need this kind of attention," Damon thought grimly. He had been doing his best to keep a low profile, and this was exactly the kind of spectacle he wanted to avoid. As if the situation couldn't get worse, he felt a sharp gaze drilling into him. He turned and saw Xander Ravenscroft glaring at him from across the room, his expression a mix of confusion and anger. Damon's lips twitched. "Oh, that's right. Xander has a crush on this girl, doesn't he?" Damon allowed himself a small, amused smile. It was short-lived, though, as he turned his attention back to Evangeline. "What do you want, Evangeline Brightwater?" he asked flatly. She straightened slightly, her composure unshaken. Yes, sir. Sir Damon, I wanted to talk about yesterday. His brow furrowed in confusion. Sir Damon? What is up with this girl? Her words gave him pause, especially the mention of yesterday. Could it be? No, she doesn't seem like she knows about Lark. So what could she possibly want? Evangeline waited for him to speak, but when he didn't, she hesitantly continued. Yesterday? What about yesterday? Get straight to the point. Damon cut her off, his tone impatient. Evangeline reached into her uniform jacket and pulled out a small object, placing it on the table. Damon's eyes flicked down to it, and his breath caught. You dropped your brooch yesterday, she explained softly. I was trying to return it to you. The sight of the silver brooch, engraved with a rune of probation, made his heart lurch. For a moment, he'd feared he'd left it at the scene of Lark Bonner's death. But no, he must have dropped it during his brief and vague encounter with Evangeline yesterday. A wave of relief washed over him, and he let out an involuntary sigh. He reached for the brooch and pinned it back onto his chest. Is that all? He asked curtly, his tone guarded once more. Evangeline blinked, caught off guard by his abruptness. She nodded slightly. Yes, that's all. Damon didn't thank her. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, dismissing her with his cold demeanor. But as the cafeteria buzzed with whispers once again, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time Evangeline Brightwater would insert herself into his life. And of course she wasn't done. Evangeline frowned. She had approached Damon with good intentions, yet he remained rude and standoffish. She sighed, deciding to brush it off. After all, he was strong, very strong. She had thought herself the strongest first-year student until the day he defeated her, and it wasn't even common knowledge that he possessed such power. Her gaze drifted to where Damon sat, in a secluded corner of the cafeteria. He must be a very humble person who doesn't like attention, she thought to herself. If Damon knew her thoughts, he would have face-bombed at the absurdity. If anything, he felt anxious around her. The gap in power between them was astronomical, and he knew he stood no chance against her if it came down to a real fight. His words were nothing but bravado, a thin shield to protect his fragile pride. Why isn't she leaving? Damon thought irritably, watching her push a button to summon a maid. Evangeline ordered her lunch and then turned her attention back to Damon. Evangeline Brightwater, Damon said sharply. I believe you've already returned my brooch. You can leave now. You have no more business with me. Evangeline shook her head, her voice calm. I'm already here. I might as well eat. Besides, I still have something I want to ask you. Damon's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help but think back to Lark, the guilt still fresh in his mind. Does she know? No, she couldn't. He reassured himself, though the doubt lingered. The maid returned with Evangeline's food, and she began eating. Damon's attention flickered to the students around them. All eyes were on their table, especially Xander Ravenscroft's. Oddly, seeing Xander seethe with jealousy brought Damon some satisfaction. Now, then, Evangeline Brightwater, Damon said, his voice cutting through the silence. What do you want? Get to the point. I don't have all day. Evangeline lifted her glass to her lips, taking a small sip. Just call me Evangeline. We're classmates in the same year, after all. Damon sighed impatiently. I said don't beat around the bush. May I call you Damon as well? She asked casually. I mean, if you're on a first-name basis with me, it's only fair that I do the same. Damon groaned inwardly, his frustration mounting. I said get to the point. Since you clearly have no intention of talking, I'm leaving. He stood abruptly, leaving her behind, but her voice stopped him in his tracks. Wait, Damon, wait, she called, her voice loud enough to carry across the cafeteria. I wanted to ask you to be my partner. The room fell silent. Damon almost tripped over his own feet at her words. His face twisted in disbelief. Xander Ravenscroft's eyes widened in shock, and the entire cafeteria erupted into murmurs. Damon's mind raced. Partner? What's she talking about? This has to be some kind of misunderstanding. He considered walking out to avoid the scrutiny, but with so many eyes on him, his legs felt like lead. Reluctantly, he turned back and resumed his seat, masking his anxiety behind a cold expression. Explain yourself, he demanded, his voice flat but his nerves far from calm.